Hey guys, tonight we're slipping between the frozen sheets of a medieval queen's bed, and I promise you by the end of this you'll never complain about your heating bill again. Picture this, you're lying in the most luxurious bedchamber in the kingdom, wrapped in silks imported from distant lands surrounded by tapestries that cost more than a village, and yet you can see your breath forming little clouds above your face. Ice crystals are literally growing on the interior walls, not outside, inside, in your bedroom, the room where you're supposed to sleep. You're a queen, which means you have access to every comfort medieval Europe can offer, and still the cold finds you. It creeps under your furs, it numbs your toes through 3 layers of wool, and it whispers against your cheeks like an unwanted lover who won't take a hint. This isn't the romantic medieval fantasy we see in movies. This is survival dressed in ermine and gold thread. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Someone's having breakfast in Tokyo, while someone else is fighting insomnia in Sao Paulo. We're all here together wandering through history's cold corridors. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1340 something. Let's say you're a queen in England, maybe you're Philippa of Hainault Edward III's wife. Though honestly, it doesn't matter which queen you are. The cold doesn't discriminate by crown size. You've spent the evening in the great hall where at least the massive fireplace and the press of bodies kept things tolerably warm. You've eaten your spiced wine and honey cakes, you've smiled at the appropriate moments during the minstrel's performance, and now you're being escorted by candlelight through increasingly frigid corridors to your private chambers. Your ladies-in-waiting flutter around you like concerned moths, and they're already shivering. One of them, the youngest, maybe 14, has her teeth chattering so hard you can hear it over the sound of your footsteps on stone. The girl's from the south of France, and she's still not adapted to English winters. Honestly, you're not sure anyone ever truly adapts. The door to your bedchamber opens, and the cold hits you like a physical wall. Yes, there's a fire in the hearth, there's always a fire in the hearth, but the room is so vast, the ceiling so high, the stone walls so thick that the heat simply vanishes. It's like trying to warm the ocean with a candle. The flames flicker and dance, casting moving shadows that make the tapestries seem alive. But you know from experience that if you stand more than 6 feet from that fireplace, you might as well be outside. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about medieval luxury. The very features that make your chamber impressive are the same features trying to kill you. Those soaring ceilings, architectural marvels that create convection currents, pulling warm air up and away from your body. Those thick stone walls, magnificent defences that retain cold like a grudge. Those narrow windows with their expensive glass, barely better than having holes in the wall, because medieval glass is about as insulating as a wet paper bag. You can see frost, actual frost, forming in the corners where the walls meet the ceiling. There's condensation frozen on the inside of the window glass, creating patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't so ominous. During the worst winters, some ladies wake to find their hair frozen to their pillows, where their breath has condensed and crystallized overnight. You've heard stories probably exaggerated, but maybe not of old lords found dead in their beds, not from illness or assassination, but simply from the cold. Just the cold waiting patiently through the night, and their hearts finally deciding it wasn't worth the fight anymore. But you're not thinking about that now. You're thinking about the elaborate ritual that's about to unfold, the nightly ceremony of not freezing to death while unconscious. Your servants are already in motion, and you're grateful for them because attempting medieval sleep alone would be genuinely suicidal. Welcome to the reality of royal rest. Let's see how you survive until morning. The architecture working against you isn't a design flaw, it's working exactly as intended, just not for your comfort. These castles were built for war, not warmth. Every feature that makes your bedchamber so impossibly cold exists because at some point someone decided that surviving a siege mattered more than surviving a Tuesday night in January. Those walls surrounding you, they're anywhere from 8 to 15 feet thick in some castles. Magnificent, yes. Impressive, absolutely. But stone is essentially a massive heat sink. During the day, those walls absorb whatever meagre warmth the winter sun provides, which isn't much in northern Europe where you're lucky to see the sun at all between November and February. Then all night long those walls radiate that cold inward toward you, like they're personally offended by your body temperature. The castle at Harlech in Wales, if you're curious, has walls that are 12 feet thick in places. Imagine trying to heat a room wrapped in 12 feet of frozen stone. You can't. You simply cannot. It's thermodynamically impossible with medieval technology. The best you can hope for is to create a small pocket of less cold near the fireplace and defend that pocket with your life. And those arrow slits, those romantically named loopholes in the walls, they're not sealed. They can't be sealed because in theory someone might need to shoot an arrow through them if the castle's under attack. Never mind that your castle hasn't seen military action in 3 generations. Those slits stay open, and winter wind howls through them like wolves singing about your imminent hypothermia. Some castles tried hanging thick fabric over the slits, but it's never quite enough. The draft finds you anyway. Cold is patient. Cold is creative. Your chamber has a vaulted ceiling, beautiful, echoing, utterly impractical. Heat rises, which you know from experience, but in a room with a 15-foot ceiling that heat just keeps rising, until it's so far above you, it might as well be in heaven. Sometimes you lie in bed and imagine all that warmth collecting up there in the darkness, having a party without you while you're down here with numb toes and chattering teeth. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood basic thermodynamics, but you don't need to understand heat transfer to know that tall rooms are cold rooms. The evidence is pressing against your skin every single night. Some queens requested smaller chambers specifically because they were warmer, but then you sacrifice status. A queen is supposed to have an enormous bedchamber. It's a symbol, so you freeze symbolically in a symbolically impressive space. The floor beneath your feet, because yes, you're still standing, your ladies are still preparing things, is either stone or tile, and it's so cold it hurts. Not uncomfortable, actually hurts. There are rushes scattered across it, and sometimes straw which provides maybe a 1/4 inch of insulation between your slippers and the thermal void below. In some castles, the bedchambers are on upper floors, which means there's a ceiling below you, which means theoretically there's a room below that might have a fire, and maybe some warmth seeps upward through the stone. But more often, your chamber is positioned for security or prestige overlooking the courtyard or in a tower or along an exterior wall. And exterior walls are the worst, because one side of that massive stone barrier is directly exposed to winter wind, rain and snow. The cold doesn't even have to work to find you. It's already pressing against the other side of your wall, just waiting. Some castles, the really fancy ones, have glazed windows. Yours does. You're very fortunate. Except medieval glass is uneven, full of bubbles and imperfections, and the panes are small, held together with lead. The gaps between panes let in drafts. The glass itself is so thin that on truly bitter nights, you can watch frost form on the interior surface spreading like lace. It's beautiful. It's also terrifying because frost on the inside of your window means the temperature in your room is below freezing. You're sleeping in a refrigerator with a crown. The door to your chamber is thick oak reinforced with iron, heavy enough that it takes 2 hands to close properly. This should help write a good seal against the corridor, except corridors in castles are just as cold as chambers, sometimes colder because they don't even have fireplaces. So closing your door doesn't keep cold out, it just traps you inside with the cold that's already here, like locking yourself in a crypt. And we haven't even talked about the chimney yet, that fireplace everyone's so grateful for. It's connected to a chimney that rises up through the castle, and chimneys are basically vertical wind tunnels. When the wind hits the top of your castle just right, it creates a downdraft that blows smoke back into your room. So you get to choose freeze and clear air or warm up slightly while choking on wood smoke. Most nights you choose smoke. At least you can't feel your face going numb when your eyes are watering. There's a reason medieval people were obsessed with tapestries, and it wasn't just artistic appreciation. Those heavy woven wall hangings create a thin air gap between the fabric and the stone, and that gap provides a microscopic amount of insulation. Your chamber has tapestries depicting biblical scenes, hunting parties, mythical beasts, whatever your family could afford. They cost a fortune. They might save your life. That's the calculation, beauty and survival for the price of a village's annual income. You're standing in an architectural masterpiece designed to withstand battering rams and siege engines. Unfortunately, you're not trying to withstand a siege, you're trying to sleep, and the building has no idea what you need. Now let's talk about the single most important piece of furniture you own, more valuable than your jeweled coronet, more essential than your throne. Your bed. Not the mattress, not the linens, the actual wooden structure. This thing is a fortress within a fortress, and you're about to understand why medieval beds looked less like sleeping platforms and more like small houses. The frame is massive. We're talking heavy oak posts at each corner, thick as a strong man's thigh, rising 7 or 8 feet into the air. These aren't delicate. These aren't decorative. These posts support the entire architecture of your survival. They're carved sure, probably with acanthus leaves or religious symbols, or your family's heraldic beasts, but that's secondary to their real purpose holding up the canopy that's going to save you from freezing in your sleep. Because here's what you need to understand, that canopy isn't a decoration, it's a trap, a heat trap. Medieval people understood that warm air rises, but they also understood that if you can contain that warm air in a smaller space, you can actually feel it. The canopy fabric stretches across the top of the 4 posts, creating a ceiling, maybe 6 feet above your mattress. Your body heat, along with the heat from the warming pan, the dogs, the servant at your feet, will get to all that rises up and hits that fabric barrier, and instead of escaping into the vastness of your chamber, it stays trapped in your little bedhouse. The curtains hanging from that canopy are where things get serious. These aren't the light gauzy drapes you're imagining. These are thick, and I mean thick wool or velvet panels, lined with additional fabric heavy enough that they don't flutter in drafts, they just hang there like protective walls. Some are quilted, some have fur trim at the bottom, where they puddle on the bed platform. When you draw these curtains closed around all 4 sides of your bed, you're essentially creating a fabric room within your stone room. It's dark in there, completely dark once the curtains are drawn and the candles are snuffed. But it's also noticeably warmer than the outer chamber. Not warm exactly, let's not get carried away, but the temperature inside your closed bed curtains might be 10 or 15 degrees higher than the rest of the room. That's the difference between sleep and misery. That's the difference between waking up alive or having your servants discover you've joined the statistics. The bed platform itself sits high off the ground, sometimes 3 feet up, requiring a little step stool to climb into. This isn't about prestige, though. It certainly looks impressive. It's about cold air. Cold air sinks pools on the floor like invisible water, and if your mattress is sitting directly on that floor, you're sleeping in the coldest part of the room. Raising the bed gets you up into slightly warmer air. Every inch matters. Some royal beds have a wooden tester board running around the base, enclosing the space beneath the bed platform. This creates a dead air space under your mattress, more insulation. Sometimes servants store your warming pans and extra blankets in there. Sometimes a very small dog sleeps in there, and its body heat rises up through the mattress ropes. Everything is calculated, even if the calculations are instinctive rather than scientific. Your bed probably costs more than a knight's annual income. A really elaborate royal bed could cost as much as a small ship. When queens travelled between castles, the bed came too disassembled, packed onto wagons reassembled in the next location. Because you cannot sleep safely without it. You could sleep in a different chamber, eat in a different hall, pray in a different chapel, but the bed, your bed with its specific curtains and specific proportions, and the way the fabric hangs just so that travels with you. There are records of beds being mentioned in royal wills passed down from mother to daughter, like heirlooms because they are heirlooms. They're survival technology wrapped in silk and status. When Eleanor of Castile died in 1290, the inventory of her possessions spent more time describing her beds than her crowns. Priorities. The curtains have one more function. Nobody talks about privacy. Your bedchamber isn't actually private. Servants sleep in here will get to them, and they can see and hear everything unless you close those curtains. The fabric walls give you a few feet of space where you can cry or pray, or simply exist without performance. In a life where you're constantly observed, constantly representing something larger than yourself, those closed curtains are the only true solitude you get. Some beds have small gaps in the curtains at eye level, little openings you can peek through, to see if your chamber door is opening, if someone's approaching, if there's danger. Because even in sleep, even in this padded fortress, you're not entirely safe. Political intrigue doesn't stop for bedtime. There are stories, again possibly exaggerated, of queens who had their beds positioned so they could see both the chamber door and the garderobe entrance, maintaining vigilance even while unconscious. When you finally climb into this structure tonight, when your ladies have finished their preparations and you settle back against your pillows, you'll reach out and draw those heavy curtains closed yourself. It's the last thing you do before sleep. And in that moment, as the fabric swings shut and the world disappears and you're enclosed in your small, dark, slightly warmer cave, you'll feel something unexpected safety. Despite the cold pressing against the castle walls, despite the winter wind howling outside, despite everything, you're in your fortress, you're in your bed, and maybe you'll make it to morning. Now let's talk about what's actually on that bed, because if you thought the frame was excessive, wait until you see the textile situation. We're about to discuss layers in a way that would make a modern sleeping bag manufacturer weep, with envy, or possibly confusion, because some of these choices seem designed by someone who'd never actually tried to sleep comfortably. Starting from the bottom of the mattress, forget everything you know about mattresses. This isn't springs and foam. This is a fabric sack, a very large fabric sack stuffed with whatever materials your household can provide. If you're wealthy, and you are, it's probably filled with wool. Good wool, carded and cleaned, but still just wool. It compresses over time, develops lumps, shifts to the sides, and needs to be restuffed every few months. Some queens have mattresses stuffed with feathers, which sounds luxurious until you realise medieval feather processing wasn't exactly sophisticated. Sometimes there are still quills in there. Sometimes you wake up with mysterious pokes in your back. Beneath that primary mattress, there's often another mattress or undermattress stuffed with straw or chaff or dried rushes. This provides a bit more height, a bit more padding, and theoretically some additional insulation from the ropes or wooden slats supporting everything. The ropes, by the way, need to be tightened regularly, which is where the phrase sleep tight comes from. Loose ropes mean a sagging mattress, mean a terrible night, mean a very grumpy queen in the morning, on top of the mattress sheets. Finally, something familiar, right? Except medieval sheets are linen. Always linen, never cotton. Because cotton is ruinously expensive and mostly theoretical in Northern Europe. These linen sheets are thick, rough, by modern standards, and woven tight enough to keep the mattress stuffing from poking through. You have a bottom sheet and a top sheet, and in winter both get so cold before you climb in that they feel like they might shatter if you move too quickly. This is why the warming pan ritual exists, which we'll get to properly later, but just know that nobody, and I mean nobody, climbs directly into winter sheets without pre-warming them. That would be genuinely dangerous. The shock of cold linen against bare skin can literally take your breath away. On top of the top sheet blankets, multiple blankets. Let's count them together, shall we? First, a wool blanket. Thick, scratchy, undyed, or maybe dyed with plant materials that leave it a muddy brown or dull green. This blanket weighs maybe 8 or 10 pounds. It's not soft. It's not meant to be soft. It's meant to trap air and create insulation, and it does that job with grim efficiency. Second blanket, also wool, possibly nicer wool, maybe even imported wool, but still fundamentally the same concept. More weight, more trapped air, more survival. Third layer, and this is where we get fancy fur. Not a fur coat exactly, but a fur coverlet. This might be lined with silk or velvet on one side, with the fur facing inward toward your body, or sometimes fur on both sides if your family's really showing off. The fur is usually squirrel rabbit, or if you're exceptionally wealthy, ermine. Those white winter furs with the black spots you see in royal portraits. That's ermine, and it takes literally hundreds of tiny ermine pelts to make a single coverlet. Each pelt is about the size of your hand. Do the math. Someone did, and they charged accordingly. The fur layer is crucial because fur traps air between the individual hairs in a way that woven fabric cannot. It's nature's insulation technology, and medieval people understood this instinctively even if they couldn't explain the physics. You can actually feel the difference when fur is added to your blanket stack. Suddenly, the cold isn't just being blocked, it's being actively defeated. But we're not done. On top of everything else, the coverlet. This is the decorative layer the one guests see if they happen to glimpse your bed. It's usually silk embroidered with gold thread, maybe displaying your coat of arms or religious imagery. It's beautiful. It's also functionally useless for warmth, which is why it goes on top of the actually helpful layers. The coverlet is politics. Everything underneath is survival. The total weight of all these layers combined is somewhere between 30 and 50 pounds, depending on how cold it is and how much you value mobility versus warmth. When you slide under this textile mountain, you feel it pressing down on you like a very expensive avalanche. It's heavy enough that rolling over requires genuine effort. Getting out of bed in the morning feels like escaping from beneath rubble. But here's the strange thing: you get used to the weight. After a few nights you start to find it comforting. The pressure feels like security, like being held. Some people genuinely cannot sleep without that weight the way modern humans can't sleep without their specific pillow. Your body learns to associate that crushing heaviness with warmth and safety, and soon you can't imagine sleeping any other way. On the coldest nights, and there are chronicles documenting this, some queens added even more layers, extra furs from storage, wool cloaks laid across the bed. In January of 1434, there's a record of a French queen sleeping under so many blankets that her ladies worried she might suffocate, but she insisted. She'd rather risk suffocation than feel the cold. The physics of all these layers is actually interesting if you're into that sort of thing. Each layer traps a thin space of air, and air is a terrible conductor of heat, which means it's a great insulator. Your body heat warms the air closest to your skin, and that air stays trapped between the linen and the wool and the fur, creating a thermal cocoon. The more layers, the more trapped air spaces, the warmer you stay. It's not comfortable. It's not easy to move, but it works. And every single layer has to be protected, maintained, aired out regularly, because moisture from your breath and body can accumulate in the fabric, and damp wool in winter is worse than no wool at all. Your household staff manages this textile mountain like it's a military operation, because in a sense it is. The blankets are your armour, the bed is your battlefield, and morning is victory. Before you even think about climbing under that mountain of textiles, there's a ritual that must be performed, a ceremony so important that it has dedicated servants assigned to it. We're talking about the warming pan, and if you've never experienced pre-industrial winter bedding, you cannot fully appreciate the quasi-religious reverence medieval people had for this copper disc on a stick. Picture a large shallow pan, maybe 14 inches across, with a lid that latches shut and a wooden handle extending 3 or 4 feet. The pan itself is copper or brass polished, until it gleams in the candlelight, because this isn't just a tool, it's a status symbol. Poor people have warming pans made of iron. You have copper. Everyone knows the difference. About an hour before you're ready to sleep, one of your chamber servants, let's call her Margaret, because she's been doing this job for 6 years and she's very good at it, goes to the kitchen fire and fills the warming pan with hot coals. Not flames coals, the red glowing heat radiating remnants of burned wood that hold their temperature for hours. She uses a small shovel, carefully selecting pieces that are the right size, not too large, or they'll be unwieldy, not too small, or they'll burn out too quickly. The lid latches shut, trapping the coals inside, and now Margaret has created a portable heat source. She carries it carefully back through the cold corridors, and we're talking carefully because one stumble could scatter hot coals across the floor, which would be embarrassing at best and catastrophic at worst. There are records of warming pan accidents causing fires, not many but enough that everyone treats this task with appropriate gravity. Margaret enters your bedchamber where the bed curtains are still open and the covers have been turned down, exposing those sheets that have been sitting in near freezing air all evening. She lifts the warming pan and slides it between the bottom sheet and the top sheet, starting at the foot of the bed where your feet will eventually rest. Then she moves it, slowly, methodically, back and forth across the width of the bed like she's ironing, except she's ironing with portable fire. The heat from the coals transfers through the copper base into the linen sheets, warming them, driving out the deathly chill, transforming them from absolutely not to possibly survivable. She works her way up the bed, feet, calves, thighs, torso, chest, making sure every section receives equal attention. This takes maybe 15 minutes of continuous motion. If she stops moving, the pan will create a hot spot, and hot spots can scorch linen or worse, create uncomfortable temperature variations. The goal is even warmth spread across the entire sleeping surface. It's a skill. Margaret's predecessor once left the pan too long in one spot and burned a hole straight through Her Majesty's sheets, and that woman was demoted so fast her head spun. The smell is distinctive hot copper and warm linen with just a hint of wood smoke. It's one of those scent memories that stays with you. Decades later, if you smell hot copper, you'll immediately think of bedtime in winter, of Margaret's concentrated face in the candlelight, of the promise of warmth in a cold world. While Margaret works, another servant, let's say young Alice, who's newer to the household, is heating stones in the fire, not coal stones. Smooth river stones, each about the size of a large potato, that have been collected specifically for this purpose. These stones hold heat even longer than coals, and they have the advantage of being wrappable. Once the stones are hot enough, and judging this temperature as an art form because too hot and they'll burn right through their wrappings, too cool and they're pointless, Alice wraps each one in flannel or wool scraps. 3 or 4 stones each bundled like little presents, and these get placed at strategic locations in your bed. One goes near where your feet will be, another near your back, maybe one between your knees if it's a particularly brutal night. Some queens have elaborate stone warming systems with silk pouches embroidered with their initials. You probably have something similar. It's the kind of detail that costs a fortune and makes essentially no functional difference, but it's expected. Everything in your life is simultaneously practical and performative. The warming pan ritual has a rhythm to it that's almost meditative. The servants move around your bed with practiced efficiency, Margaret with her pan, Alice with her stones, both of them silent or speaking in low murmurs. You're standing nearby, watching, maybe warming your hands at the fireplace, waiting for them to signal that your bed is ready. Here's what historians still argue about: did the warming pans actually make that much difference, or was the ritual itself the point? Because yes, the sheets are warmer after treatment, but they start cooling again immediately. Within 15 minutes, they're already losing heat. Some scholars suggest the warming pan was more psychological than practical, a ceremonial transition from waking to sleeping, a signal that the dangerous part of the day was about to begin and preparations had been made. But you don't care about historical debates right now. You just know that when Margaret finally withdraws the warming pan and Alice has positioned the last stone and they both step back and curtsy, and Margaret says, "Your bed is prepared, my lady," you feel something like gratitude mixed with relief. The sheets won't be warm for long, but they're warm now, and now is when you have to get in. The coals in the warming pan still have some life left, so Margaret doesn't just dump them. She carries the pan to a metal stand near the fireplace, where it will sit overnight, radiating a tiny bit of additional heat into the room. Every little bit counts. In the morning, the coals will be ash, grey and lifeless, and the pan will go back to the kitchen to begin the cycle again. This happens every single night. Every single night. Winter is 6 months long. Margaret and Alice will perform this ritual approximately 180 times before spring arrives. Their hands will crack and bleed from the cold and the work. They'll breathe smoke and stumble through dark corridors and burn their fingers on hot copper at least once each. But they'll do it because the alternative, you climbing into frozen sheets without preparation, is unthinkable. And tonight, like every night, you'll slide between those briefly warm linens and whisper a small prayer of thanks for copper pans and loyal servants, and the small mercies that make survival possible. Now comes the moment when you actually have to undress for bed, and if you're imagining slipping into a silk nightgown like some pre-Raphaelite painting, I need to adjust your expectations immediately. Medieval people did not get naked for winter sleep. That would be insane. That would be suicide with extra steps. You're currently wearing your day clothes, a chemise and undergown and overgown. Possibly a surcoat, definitely sleeves that tie on separately, and enough pins and laces and buttons to employ a small army of ladies' maids. Getting dressed in the morning took 45 minutes. Getting undressed at night is going to take almost as long. But here's the key detail: you're not getting undressed. You're changing costumes. Your ladies-in-waiting cluster around you near the fireplace because this is the warmest spot in the room and you're about to be temporarily vulnerable. They start removing the outer layers, the surcoat first, then the overgown, unlacing the sides, lifting it over your head. Each piece gets folded and placed on a chest, or hung on a pole, or handed to a servant who'll take it away for airing. You cannot wear the same gown 2 days in a row. Not because of fashion, but because moisture from your body accumulates in the fabric, and damp fabric in winter is your enemy. But the undergown that stays, and the chemise beneath that absolutely stays. You're not removing your base layers. Instead, you're adding to them. Someone brings your sleeping gown, which is really just another undergown, but made of heavier wool, possibly flannel, if your household has access to it. This goes on over your day chemise. So now you're wearing linen chemise, wool undergown, wool sleeping gown. 3 layers of fabric between your skin and the night air. Your arms are completely covered. The gown reaches your ankles, possibly pools around your feet if you're not careful. Some queens wear wool stockings to bed. Some wear 2 pairs. Your feet are going to be the coldest part of your body no matter what you do, because they're furthest from your core, furthest from the warm stones Margaret placed in the bed, and closest to the cold air that pools at mattress level even inside your closed curtains. Wool stockings help. They're itchy, they bunch up, they make your feet sweat, which then makes them cold, but they're better than nothing. Over your sleeping gown, you might add a bedrobe, a loose coat-like garment lined with fur or additional wool. This is for moving around the chamber if you need to, for sitting up in bed to say your prayers, for maintaining some warmth, if you have to get up in the night for the garderobe, because you will have to get up. You drank spiced wine at dinner. Your bladder doesn't care that it's freezing outside the bed fortress. On your head, a linen cap. Always. Your hair, which is long, because of course it is. You're a queen, gets braided and tucked up under this cap. Partly this is hygiene, because washing hair in winter is a nightmare, and you'd rather not get it tangled while you sleep. Partly it's warmth, because you lose significant body heat through your head. Partly it's modesty, because even though you're in your private chamber, with only your most trusted servants, there are still standards. Going to bed with loose hair is the sort of thing peasant women do, and you are many things, but peasant is not one of them. The cap ties under your chin with a ribbon or lace. It's not comfortable. Nothing about this is comfortable, but comfort is not the goal. The goal is mourning. Here's something nobody tells you about sleeping in multiple layers of wool you sweat. Not immediately and not everywhere, but certain spots behind your knees, under your arms, along your spine, these places get damp during the night as your body tries to regulate temperature inside your textile cocoon. And damp wool against skin in a cold room creates a clammy, miserable sensation that wakes you up shivering despite being under 50 pounds of blankets. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood moisture management in clothing, but your body understands it perfectly. You've learned through experience that the linen chemise closest to your skin will absorb the worst of the sweat and linen dries faster than wool, so layering them in the right order matters. This is knowledge passed from mother to daughter queen to princess, never written down because it's too obvious to mention, yet somehow lost to history because historians didn't think women's sleeping arrangements were worth documenting. Some winter nights you sleep in your wool cloak. Just throw it over everything else, fur lining facing in extra weight, extra warmth, extra survival. There's no shame in this. There's a record from 1398 of a French duchess who slept in her travelling cloak for 3 straight months because the castle she was visiting had such terrible drafts. Nobody judged her. They understood. Your ladies are finishing now, adjusting your cap, making sure your sleeping gown isn't twisted, checking that your bedrobe is within reach on the bed. They're also dressed for sleep, similar wool gowns, similar caps, but their garments are less elaborate than yours. They don't have fur linings. They don't have silk ribbons. But they have wool, and wool is democracy in fabric form. It keeps everyone equally, not quite warm enough. Young Alice is already in her sleeping spot at the foot of your bed. We'll talk more about that arrangement soon, but just know she's been settling in while you undressed, claiming her position, arranging her own small blanket. Margaret is trimming the candles, making sure the fire is banked properly, for overnight burning enough coals to maintain heat, not enough flame to be dangerous. You approach your bed and someone lifts the covers for you, lifting all those layers, that massive weight holding them up so you can slide beneath. The briefly warmed sheets are already cooling, but they're still notably warmer than the ambient room temperature. It's now or never. You climb in, and the mattress compresses under your weight, the ropes creak slightly, and you settle back against your pillows, which are stuffed with feathers, more feathers than you'd think necessary, piled high, because sleeping flat on your back makes breathing difficult under all this weight. You need to be slightly elevated. The covers lower onto you like gentle thunder. All that weight pressing down, and you're wearing what amounts to a wool suit under there. You're not naked. You're not even close to naked. You're wearing more clothing than some people wear outside during the day. And you know what? You're still cold. But you're no longer dangerously cold. You've moved from possible death to manageable misery, and that's a victory. That's preparation. That's technology medieval style. The curtains are still open. We're not quite done yet. But you're in position, dressed for survival, ready for whatever the night brings. You're in bed now, covers settling around you like a textile avalanche, but you're not alone. You're never alone. Let me introduce you to the most underappreciated members of your household, the body servants who sleep in your chamber, and specifically the girl currently arranging herself at the foot of your bed. Alice is maybe 15, maybe 16. Nobody's entirely sure because peasant birth records are more suggestion than documentation. She's been in your service for 2 years, promoted from kitchen work to chamber service, because she's quiet, reliable, and small enough to fit in the available sleeping spaces. Right now, she's wedging herself into position at the very foot of your mattress, curled up like a cat, her own thin blanket pulled around her shoulders. She's not beside you, not next to you on the same level. She's perpendicular, lying across the width of the bed at your feet, her head near your left ankle, her feet dangling off the right side. This arrangement is both hierarchical and practical. Hierarchical because she's literally beneath you at your feet in the position of service. Practical because her body heat rises up through the layers of blankets, warming your legs and feet, the parts of you that would otherwise be coldest. Alice is a human hot water bottle. That's her job. That's her entire purpose in this room tonight. Her body temperature, approximately 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, same as yours, radiates into the bed space, contributing to the microclimate you're all trying to create inside these curtains. She's not comfortable. The foot of the bed isn't wide enough for her to stretch out fully, so she sleeps in a semi-fetal position, knees bent, adjusting her posture throughout the night to avoid cramping. But here's the thing, Alice is also warmer than she'd be anywhere else. If she slept in the servants' quarters, she'd be sharing a straw pallet with 3 other girls with one thin blanket between them, in a room with no fireplace. Here at the foot of your bed, she benefits from your blankets. Your residual body heat the stones Margaret placed near your feet that also warm her. It's symbiotic. You both gain from this arrangement. On the coldest nights, there might be 2 servants at the foot of the bed. Alice and another girl packed in like sardines, their combined body heat, creating a noticeable temperature difference. Some queens had servants sleep on both sides of the bed as well, on pallets placed right up against the bed frame, close enough that heat transfers through the wooden structure. The servants weren't happy about sleeping on the floor, but they were happy about not freezing to death, and medieval life is basically an endless series of those kinds of compromises. Margaret sleeps in the chamber too, but not in your bed. She has a proper pallet near the fireplace with her own blanket, a better blanket than Alice's, because Margaret is senior staff. Her job tonight includes maintaining the fire. She'll wake every few hours to add wood to make sure the coals don't die completely, to keep that one source of heat functioning until morning. It's exhausting. She'll be tired tomorrow. But if the fire goes out, everyone suffers, so she does it. There's a hierarchy even in sleeping arrangements. The closer you are to the queen's bed, the higher your status. The closer you are to the fireplace, the higher your status. Margaret, being near the fireplace but not in the queen's bed, occupies a middle position. Alice in the bed but at the feet occupies a different middle position. A third servant, if there is one, might sleep near the door, farthest from both heat sources, but positioned to hear if anyone tries to enter during the night. These sleeping arrangements aren't just about warmth. They're about security. You're vulnerable when you sleep, obviously everyone is, but you're a queen, which means you're a target. Political targets don't take nights off. Having servants in the room means having witnesses, having alerts, having people who'll scream if someone tries to sneak in with bad intentions. It's primitive security theatre, but it works because everyone knows the servants are there. Alice will hear everything tonight. If you cry out in your sleep, she'll hear it. If you get up to use the guardrobe, she'll wake up partially tracking your movement. If you have nightmares, and you sometimes do, everyone does, she'll hear you whimpering through the bed curtains. She never mentions these things in the morning. Discretion is a survival skill for servants. What she hears in the night stays in the night. Historians still argue about whether this arrangement was exploitative or mutually beneficial. Modern sensibilities look at this and see class oppression forcing a teenage girl to sleep at a queen's feet like a dog. But medieval sensibilities saw it differently. Alice has food shelter, a position protection, and a spot near enough to wealth and power that maybe someday she'll catch a favourable marriage or a better position. She's cold, yes, but she's alive, and in 1350s, whatever alive counts for a lot. The body heat exchange is real, though. Scientific studies done on historical sleeping arrangements have confirmed that multiple people sleeping in close proximity can raise the ambient temperature of a shared sleeping space by several degrees. Every degree matters when you're fighting hypothermia. Alice's presence in your bed isn't medieval superstition. It's applied thermodynamics figured out through trial and error over centuries. Some queens got emotionally attached to their sleeping servants. There are letters documenting a queen who insisted on the same girl sleeping at her feet every night for 12 years, and when that servant married and left service, the queen reportedly wept. Whether that was affection or just anxiety about breaking routine and losing a known heat source, nobody can say. Maybe both. Alice shifts slightly at your feet, finding a better position. You can feel the movement through the mattress, a small reminder that you're not alone in your fortress. The bed curtains are still open. Margaret is doing final checks of the room, but soon they'll close and then it will be just you. Alice is quiet, breathing the weight of blankets and the long night ahead. In the morning, Alice will wake before you. She'll slip out of the bed without disturbing you if possible, or wait for your stirring if not. Her feet will hit the freezing floor, and she'll bite back a gasp because the temperature shock never gets easier. She'll begin her morning duties, opening curtains, rebuilding the fire, bringing washing water, while you slowly emerge from your textile cocoon. But that's morning, and morning is impossibly far away right now. For now, Alice is in position, Margaret is checking the candles one last time, and you're trying to generate enough body heat to make this whole elaborate system work. You're not sleeping alone. You're sleeping in community in a carefully orchestrated arrangement of bodies and blankets and shared survival. It's not privacy. It's not comfort, but it's how you make it through winter. Now let's talk about the other warm bodies in your chamber, the ones with 4 legs and absolutely no concept of personal boundaries. Your dogs. Because yes, you sleep with dogs, and before you imagine some cute Cavalier King Charles Spaniel curled up photogenically at your hip, let me paint you a more accurate picture. Medieval lapdogs were bred for one primary purpose: generating heat. Everything else, companionship, cuteness, status symbol, was secondary to their function as living, breathing, furry heat sources. The most popular breeds for queens were small spaniels, Italian greyhounds, and various terrier-type dogs that nobody bothered to document properly because they were tools, not pets in the modern sense. You probably have 2 or 3 dogs that sleep in your chamber regularly. Let's say tonight it's Bella and Pip. Bella being the older spaniel who's been with you for 6 years, and Pip being the younger terrier who's still learning chamber manners and occasionally forgets that the tapestries are not appropriate bathroom locations. Bella knows the routine. As soon as she sees you approaching the bed, she's already jumping up, not gracefully because she's getting older, and her hips aren't what they used to be, but determinedly. She positions herself in the curve behind your knees, that little pocket of space where your legs bend. This is prime real estate in bed geography. It's protected by your body on one side and blankets on the other, creating an especially warm microclimate. Bella circles 3 times. Why do dogs do this? Nobody knows, they just do, and then settles with a satisfied grunt. Her body temperature is actually higher than yours. Dogs run about 101 to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can feel that heat immediately through your sleeping gown. It's not a gentle warmth. It's an aggressive, almost uncomfortable hotness at first, but within minutes your body adjusts and that heat becomes necessary. Bella weighs maybe 12 pounds, which is additional weight, on top of your blankets, additional pressure, additional warmth retention. Pip, being younger and less trained, tries to climb up to your chest level, because puppies always want to be near faces. Margaret intercepts him. She's still in the room doing final preparations and redirects him to the foot of the bed near Alice. Pip tolerates this with poor Grace circling, huffing, finally settling against Alice's hip. Alice, for her part, is probably grateful. Pip is warm, and warmth at the foot of the bed is scarce. The smell is immediate. Dogs smell like dogs, a particular musk of fur and skin oils and whatever they rolled in earlier today. It's not pleasant by modern standards, but you're so used to it that you barely notice. Everyone's chambers smell like dogs. It's just how things are. The dogs also smell like wood smoke because they spent the evening lying near the Great Hall fireplace, and that smoke scent transfers to their fur and then to your bedding they're going to shed. All night long, dog hair will work its way into your sheets, your blankets, your sleeping gown. In the morning there will be visible fur accumulation that servants will brush away, but some of it will remain woven into the fabric. Your royal linens contain DNA from a dozen different dogs across the years. Archaeologists have actually found dog hair in excavated medieval bedding, confirming what the historical record suggests this was universal practice among those who could afford it. Bella snores. Not constantly, but intermittently, these little huffing sounds that you've learned to tune out over the years. Sometimes she dreams, her paws twitch, she makes small whimpering noises, her whole body shudders. You don't know what dogs dream about. Rabbits maybe. Warmer rooms. Better scraps from dinner. The dogs serve another function beyond warmth alert system. Both Bella and Pip will wake instantly if they hear unusual sounds. A door opening, footsteps in the corridor, anything outside the normal pattern. They won't necessarily bark. Chamber dogs are trained not to disturb the queen's sleep with unnecessary noise, but they'll lift their heads, ears forward, body tense. And that tension transfers through the bed to you, waking you just enough to assess the situation. There are stories, possibly apocryphal, but everybody believes them anyway, of chamber dogs saving queens from assassination attempts. A dog that growled at an approaching figure in the dark. A dog that barked despite training when someone tried to enter through a forgotten back passage. Whether these stories are true doesn't matter. People believe them, which means keeping dogs in the bedchamber is both practical and politically smart. Some queens had cats instead of dogs, or in addition to dogs. Cats were theoretically warmer per pound because they could curl into tighter spaces, but cats were also less predictable. A dog stayed where you put it. A cat wandered, sat on your face, knocked things over in the dark. Most queens preferred dogs. The fur itself provides insulation. When Bella settles against your legs, her coat creates a barrier of trapped air, same principle as the wool blankets, but biological. Her fur is naturally oily, which repels some moisture, which means she stays warmer and drier than wool fabric would. Evolution designed dogs for cold climates long before humans started breeding them for chambers, and you're benefiting from millennia of natural selection. Pip farts. This happens. Medieval dog diets were heavy on table scraps and bones and things that didn't agree with digestive systems. The smell is immediate and unfortunate, and there's nothing you can do about it except breathe through your mouth and wait for it to dissipate. Alice at the foot of the bed probably gets the worst of it. She doesn't complain. Servants never complain about dog farts. That would be career limiting. Historians still argue whether sleeping with dogs was primarily about warmth or companionship. The records suggest warmth was the driving factor, but the emotional attachment was real too. When Bella eventually dies, and dogs don't live as long as queens, you'll mourn her. You'll have her body buried in a specific spot in the garden. You'll mention her in letters, because yes, she was a heat source, but she was also there every night, warm and alive and breathing in the dark. Margaret finally finishes her preparations. The fire is banked, the candles are reduced to just 1 or 2 that will burn safely overnight, the chamber door is checked and secured. She moves to her own pallet near the fireplace, wrapping herself in her blanket. Alice is already drowsy at your feet, Pip warming her side. Bella is deeply settled against your legs, radiating heat like a furry furnace. It's almost time to close the curtains, but first there's one more ritual to complete one more layer of medieval survival strategy that doesn't involve textiles or servants or dogs. We need to talk about what you put inside your body before sleep, because staying warm isn't just about external layers. But your bed is fuller now, warmer, more alive. You've assembled your team human and canine, and together you might just make it to morning. The fire situation in your bedchamber is complicated, and by complicated I mean potentially lethal, in ways that would make a modern fire marshal have a complete breakdown. Let's talk about why you can't just make the room warmer by building a bigger fire. Your bedchamber does have a fireplace. It's built into the exterior wall, which is already a problem because exterior walls are the coldest surfaces in the castle, and it's connected to a chimney that rises up through multiple floors before exiting somewhere near the roof. The fireplace opening is large, maybe 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall, because medieval masons subscribed to the bigger is better school of thought without fully understanding thermodynamics. Here's the fundamental issue: most of the heat goes straight up the chimney. Not some of the heat, most of it. The smoke and hot air rise physics being physics, and they take the warmth with them up and out of your room gone. What little heat radiates outward into the chamber is immediately absorbed by those massive stone walls we talked about earlier, or it rises to that vaulted ceiling where it's useless to you. Margaret has built tonight's fire according to strict protocols. Too small and it provides no meaningful warmth. Too large and it creates dangerous drafts as it pulls cold air in from every crack and crevice in the room to feed the flames. A big fire is hungry for oxygen, and in a medieval chamber that oxygen comes from outside through the window, gaps under the door through the arrow slits. Which means a big fire actually makes you colder by creating wind inside your room. She's aimed for the sweet spot, enough burning wood to produce steady heat and light, not so much that it creates problematic airflow. The logs are oak probably because oak burns long and hot. They're stacked carefully, a base layer with kindling beneath, then progressively larger pieces, the whole arrangement designed to burn steadily for several hours before needing attention. The flames cast moving shadows across the room. It's beautiful, honestly. The light flickers on the tapestries, making the woven figures seem alive. It glints off the copper warming pan on its stand. It creates a small circle of orange-gold illumination in a room otherwise dominated by darkness. If you were a painter, you'd want to capture this moment. But beauty doesn't solve the cold problem. Even standing 6 feet from this fire, you'd barely feel its warmth. 8 feet away, nothing. The heat dissipates so quickly in the massive volume of your chamber that it's essentially decorative beyond the immediate hearth area. Some chambers have multiple fireplaces, one in the main room and another in a smaller antechamber, but this creates coordination problems. Each fire needs fuel, needs tending, needs a servant to maintain it overnight. And each chimney is another potential draft source, another place where wind can enter the structure. More fires doesn't always equal more warmth. Sometimes it just equals more complexity. The smoke is unavoidable. Even with a properly functioning chimney, some smoke stays in the room, hovering near the ceiling, gradually working its way into the tapestries and bed curtains, and your clothing and your hair. You'll smell like smoke in the morning. Everyone does. It's so universal that nobody notices anymore. When you occasionally meet someone who doesn't smell like wood, smoke a foreign visitor who just arrived, maybe it's actually jarring. They smell wrong, too clean. The smoke contains particles that irritate your throat and lungs. You cough sometimes in the night, a dry hacking cough that medieval physicians attribute to vapours or ill humours, but that modern doctors would recognise as smoke inhalation effects. Chronic exposure to wood smoke increases respiratory problems, but again, what's the alternative freeze? That's not an alternative. On windy nights, and tonight is somewhat windy, you can hear it outside, the chimney creates unpredictable effects. Sometimes the wind blows across the top of the chimney in just the wrong way and creates a downdraft pushing smoke back into your chamber. Margaret has positioned a fire screen in front of the flames to mitigate this, but screens only do so much. If the wind shifts strongly enough, you're going to wake up choking on smoke. There's also the carbon monoxide issue, except medieval people don't know about carbon monoxide. They know that sometimes people die in their sleep in rooms with fires, especially if the room is very enclosed, and they attribute these deaths to various causes: weak constitution, divine punishment, bad air, but they don't understand the actual mechanism. Carbon monoxide is colourless, odourless and deadly, and medieval chambers with poor ventilation and active fires are producing it all night long. You're probably safe. Probably. Your chamber is drafty enough that fresh air is constantly entering, diluting any carbon monoxide before it reaches lethal concentrations. But that ventilation is the same ventilation that makes you cold. You can't seal the room to trap heat without also trapping deadly gas. It's an impossible choice that you don't even know you're making. The fire will need to be fed around midnight, then again around 3 in the morning. Margaret has a small pile of logs stacked near the hearth, within arm's reach of her pallet, so she can add fuel without fully waking up. She's trained herself to sleep lightly, to rouse at intervals, to check the fire's status through barely opened eyes. It's exhausting. She's been doing this for years and she's perpetually sleep deprived, but that's the job. If the fire goes out completely, the room temperature will drop precipitously. Within an hour, it would be near freezing in here. Within 2 hours, you'd be in genuine danger, even under all your blankets with Alice and the dogs. The fire is life, but it's a fragile, demanding life that requires constant attention. Some castles have architectural features designed to improve heating efficiency: reflective metal plates behind fires, alcoves that trap and redirect heat channels that theoretically distribute warm air. But these are rare and expensive and don't work as well as their designers hoped. Your chamber probably has none of these innovations. You have a hole in the wall with a chimney attached, same as castles have had for 300 years. The firewood itself is a resource that requires management. Your household burns through cords of wood every winter and somebody has to cut it, transport it, stack it dry, distribute it to the various chambers and halls. There are servants whose entire job is wood management. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. Without them, you'd run out of fuel by February and spend the rest of winter in genuine crisis. Historians still argue whether medieval heating technology was really that primitive, or whether we're missing something, some technique or arrangement that would have made chambers warmer than our reconstruction suggest. But the primary sources are consistent. People were cold. They complained about being cold in letters, in diaries, in marginal notes, in manuscripts. The cold was constant, pervasive, and apparently unsolvable with available technology. The fire pops suddenly, a pocket of moisture in the wood turning to steam and bursting, and sparks fly upward into the chimney. One lands on the hearthstone, glowing orange for a moment before fading to grey. Margaret doesn't even move. She's heard that sound 10,000 times. You're not near the fire now. You're in bed, separated from the hearth by 10 feet of cold air and darkness. The fire's light barely reaches you here. Its heat certainly doesn't. The fire exists in its own sphere, maintaining itself, performing its vital function of not quite warming the room, while simultaneously creating drafts and smoke and carbon monoxide risks. But you need it anyway, because without it, you'd wake to frozen water in the washing basin, to frost on the inside of the door, to a chamber so cold that getting out of bed would be impossible without serious preparation. The fire is inadequate, but inadequate is infinitely better than nothing, and so it burns tended by Margaret consuming oak, producing light and heat and smoke, the heartbeat of your chamber flickering through the long dark hours until dawn. Before the bed curtains close, before you surrender to sleep, there's one final element of your survival strategy that needs to be addressed: what you put inside your body. Because staying warm isn't just about external layers and fires and dogs. It's also about internal fuel, about convincing your body from the inside that it has the resources to make it through the night. About an hour before bed, so shortly before you began undressing, you consumed a cup of mulled wine. Not a small cup. A proper cup may be 8 or 10 ounces heated until it was almost too hot to drink, spiced with cinnamon cloves. Ginger, maybe a little nutmeg if your household spice supplies were good this year. There was honey dissolved in it too, making it sweet and thick, coating your throat as you drank. This wasn't pleasure. Well, it was also pleasure, but primarily it was medicine. Medieval physicians, working from theories inherited from ancient Greece and Rome, believed that the human body contained 4 humours: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant keeping these humours balanced. Cold weather threatened to make your body too phlegmatic, too cold and wet, which could lead to all sorts of problems from coughs to death. The solution: consume things that were hot and dry in nature. Wine was considered hot. Spices were definitely hot, especially ginger and pepper, which created actual burning sensations on the tongue-proof positive of their heating properties. Honey was warm and nourishing. Combining these ingredients created a beverage that would theoretically warm you from within, thickening your blood, fortifying your natural heat, giving your body the resources to fight the cold through the long night. Did it work? Well, alcohol does cause vasodilation. It makes your blood vessels expand, which brings more blood to your skin, which creates a temporary sensation of warmth. That's real. The spices contain compounds that create warming sensations and might increase metabolism slightly. Also real. The honey provides calories which your body can convert to heat energy. Real again. But here's the catch. Alcohol also lowers your core body temperature over time. That initial warm flush is your body radiating heat outward, which feels nice in the moment, but actually makes you colder overall. Medieval physicians didn't know this. They just knew that spiced wine before bed was traditional, seemed to help, and had been recommended by authorities for centuries. So you drank it. The cup was brought to you on a small tray, the wine steaming, the smell of spices filling the chamber. You probably said a small prayer before drinking, thanking God for his provisions, asking for protection through the night standard devotional practice. Then you drank slowly, letting the heat spread through your chest and stomach, feeling your cheeks flush, feeling something like confidence that you could survive the next 8 hours. Some queens also ate a small amount of food before bed. Not a full meal that would be considered unhealthy, hard to digest while sleeping, but something small and warming. Bread soaked in warm milk with honey. A small bowl of pottage, that thick soup stew made from whatever vegetables and grains were available, maybe with a little meat if you were lucky. The goal was to put fuel in your body calories that could be converted to heat overnight. There's a recipe preserved in a 14th century household manual for something called a sleep caudle, a mixture of warm ale, oatmeal, honey and spices cooked into a thick gruel, specifically for consumption before bed. It looks absolutely disgusting by modern standards, but it's packed with calories and warming spices, and apparently it was popular among those who could afford the ingredients. You might have also consumed garlic. Yes, garlic. Medieval medical texts are obsessed with garlic's properties. It was considered universally beneficial, warming, strengthening, protective against disease and evil spirits and cold. Some queens ate a clove of raw garlic before bed, believing it would keep their blood strong through the night. The smell was intense. Everyone in your chamber smelled like garlic. Nobody cared because everyone was doing it. There are stranger practices too. Some medical texts recommend consuming small amounts of ground pepper in wine, or powdered ginger mixed with honey, or various herbal concoctions made from plants we can barely identify today. Medieval pharmacology was part empirical observation, part ancient authority, part wishful thinking, and part actual effectiveness. Modern studies have shown that some of these remedies, ginger, especially, do have mild thermogenic properties. They weren't completely wrong. What you definitely did not consume before bed: cold water. Drinking cold water before sleep was considered genuinely dangerous, possibly fatal. Cold liquids would cool your stomach, which would spread cold through your whole body, which could lead to death. This belief was so strong that people died of thirst rather than drink cold water when no warm alternatives were available. Was this medically accurate? No. Did people believe it absolutely? Yes. The act of drinking warm liquids also served a psychological function. It was a ritual, a transition moment between waking and sleeping, a signal to your body that the dangerous part of the day was about to begin and preparations had been made. Modern sleep science recognizes the importance of bedtime rituals for sleep quality, and medieval people understood this instinctively, even if they explained it using humor theory rather than neuroscience. Your bladder situation is now complicated. You've consumed 8 to 10 ounces of liquid an hour ago. In about 3 to 4 hours, you're going to wake up needing to urinate. This is inevitable. You know it's inevitable. everyone knows. But the alternative, not drinking anything warm before bed, is worse. So you accept the trade-off temporary internal warmth now in exchange for having to leave your warm bed later. The spiced wine is also mildly soporific. Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, which means it makes you drowsy. Combined with the warmth and the psychological association of this drink with bedtime, you're already feeling sleepy. Your eyelids are heavy. The day has been long. Your body is ready to shut down for maintenance and conservation mode. Margaret has finished her preparations. The fire is properly arranged. The bed is as warm as it's going to get. Alice is settled at your feet. Dogs are in position. Your clothing is layered appropriately. You've consumed your preventive medicine in liquid form. Every preparation that can be made has been made. You reach out one last waking action and begin pulling the heavy bed curtains closed. One side, then the other, then the foot, then the side near your head. The fabric swings shut with a soft, heavy sound, and suddenly you're enclosed. The world has shrunk to the dimensions of your bed cave. The chamber beyond the curtains still exists, but it's separate now, distant someone else's problem. Inside your curtain fortress, it's completely dark. The firelight doesn't penetrate this heavy fabric. You can't see your hand in front of your face, but it's noticeably warmer, maybe 5 or 6 degrees warmer than the outer chamber. Your body heat the dog's heat. Alice's heat, all trapped in this smaller space building accumulating. You settle deeper into your pillows, adjusting the blankets, finding the position where the weight is distributed properly, and you can actually breathe. Bella shifts against your legs, resettling. You can hear Alice breathing at your feet, slow, already halfway to sleep. Outside the curtains, Margaret coughs softly near the fire. The mulled wine is still warm in your stomach. The spices create a gentle burning sensation that you've learned to associate with safety. Your body is preparing for sleep, heart rate slowing, breathing, deepening consciousness, beginning to slip. You've done everything you can. You've assembled every survival strategy medieval technology and tradition can offer. You've layered textiles and bodies and heat sources and prayers and medicine into a comprehensive defense against the cold. Now comes the hard part, actually sleeping through it. Now we need to talk about the thing nobody wants to discuss, but everyone has to deal with what happens when your bladder decides it's had enough, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning, and you have to leave your warm fortress to deal with biological necessities. The garderobe. That's the polite medieval term for it. Modern people would call it toilet, but that's far too generous. What you have is a small closet-like room, sometimes just an alcove jutting out from your chamber wall, with a wooden seat built over a shaft that drops straight down, eventually emptying into the moat, or a cesspit, or sometimes just the exterior castle wall, where gravity and rain handle disposal. The garderobe is not heated. Obviously it's not heated. Who would heat a toilet? The very idea is absurd. Which means that right now, at approximately 3 in the morning, that small stone closet is the coldest place in the castle, aside from the actual outdoors. The shaft creates a natural chimney effect, pulling cold air up from below, and that stone seat is so cold it could give you frostbite on contact. You wake up. You don't want to wake up, but your bladder is insistent that growing pressure that starts as a minor discomfort and builds into an urgent need that cannot be ignored. You lie there for a few minutes, hoping it will go away, knowing it won't. Bella is pressed against your legs, warm and perfect. The blankets are heavy and secure. The darkness inside your closed curtains is complete and comforting. But you have to go. You reach out and find the edge of the bed curtain, pulling it aside just enough to let in the faint glow from the banked fire. The temperature difference hits immediately inside the curtains was maybe 55 degrees. The outer chamber is probably 45. That 10-degree drop is shocking. Your face, which was warm, is suddenly cold. Margaret is asleep on her pallet, or pretending to be. Alice definitely is asleep at your feet. You can hear her deep, even breathing. The dogs haven't stirred. They're smart enough to know that movement equals cold and staying still equals survival. You have to push aside the mountain of blankets. All that weight, all that trapped warmth, you're about to abandon it. You swing your legs out from under the covers, and the cold air hits your wool-stockinged feet like a physical attack. Even through the stockings, the shock is intense. You hesitate, sitting on the edge of the mattress, gathering courage. Your bedrobe is within reach. You made sure of that before sleeping. You pull it on over your sleeping gown, wrapping it tight, trying to trap whatever body heat you still have. Then comes the worst part. Your feet have to touch the floor. The stone floor is so cold it hurts. Actually hurts. The wool stockings provide almost no insulation against this level of cold. You stand quickly, weight shifting from foot to foot, a little dance of misery that probably looks absurd but feels necessary. There's a candle in a holder near your bed kept burning low specifically for situations like this. You pick it up, the holder is metal and also freezing, and begin the short journey to the guardrobe. It's maybe 10 feet from your bed. It feels like a mile. The guardrobe door is slightly ajar. It's always slightly ajar because the smell needs somewhere to go. You push it open fully and a wave of cold air rushes out. This alcove has a narrow window slit for ventilation, and tonight's wind is coming straight through it. The cold in here is aggressive, deliberate, personal. The wooden seat is covered with frost. Actual frost. You can see it in the candlelight, a thin white coating on the wood. This is what happens when stone walls and cold air and a ventilation shaft combine forces. You're supposed to sit on this, with your bare skin, in approximately 30 seconds. Some queens keep a cushion on the guardrobe seat specifically to make this less horrific. You might have one. But cushions absorb moisture and smell, so it's a trade-off between comfort and hygiene. Let's say you don't have a cushion. Let's say you're facing the full medieval toilet experience. You arrange your sleeping gown and undergarments, hiking everything up in the complicated way that multiple layers of fabric require. The cold air hits your exposed skin, and every nerve ending screams in protest. You lower yourself onto that frosted wooden seat, and it's exactly as bad as you expected. Possibly worse. The cold shoots through your body like lightning. You gasp involuntarily, your muscles clench. This is not comfortable. This is not pleasant. This is biological necessity intersecting with architectural hostility. You do what you need to do as quickly as possible. There's no toilet paper that won't be invented for centuries. There might be scraps of linen or wool set aside for this purpose, or maybe just water in a bowl, or maybe you just deal with it and wash properly in the morning. Medieval hygiene practices around elimination are barely documented because nobody wanted to write them down. The shaft below you is dark and presumably deep. Things fall down there and disappear. In theory, they end up somewhere that gets cleaned eventually. In practice, medieval waste management was more aspiration than achievement. You try not to think about it. The whole process takes maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes of intense cold and discomfort and vulnerability. Then you stand, rearrange your clothing, grab your candle, and flee back to your bed as quickly as dignity and darkness allow. The journey back to bed feels longer than the journey away. Your feet are numb now. Your exposed skin is burning cold. The bedrobe and sleeping gown are inadequate. The chamber feels vast and hostile. You aim for the faint warmth radiating from the banked fire, using it as a beacon. You reach your bed and climb back in with graceless urgency, pulling the blankets over yourself, yanking the curtains closed, trying to recreate the cocoon you abandoned. But it's different now. The sheets where you were lying are still somewhat warm, but your feet are ice, your hands are ice, your face is ice. You've imported cold into your warm space. Bella disturbed by your movement shifts and grumbles, but doesn't leave her position. The dogs are doing their job, they're staying put, maintaining their contribution to the communal warmth. Alice might have woken slightly, but doesn't say anything. This happens every night. It's normal. You lie there shivering, waiting for your body temperature to recover. It takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes before you stop shivering, another 10 before you feel genuinely warm again. The whole event, from waking to pee to finally being comfortable enough to sleep again, has cost you maybe half an hour of sleep, and an enormous expenditure of courage and physical discomfort. And you'll have to do it again tomorrow night, and the next night, and every night until spring comes and the temperatures moderate enough that the garderobe is merely unpleasant instead of torturous. Historians still argue whether medieval people developed some kind of psychological coping mechanism for this repeated trauma, or whether they just suffered through it, and considered it normal because everyone suffered through it equally. The sources don't really address it. Apparently nightly trips to a freezing toilet weren't considered remarkable enough to document. But you know, your body knows. Every winter night includes this moment of leaving safety, facing the cold, surviving it, and returning. It's a test you pass over and over, a small victory of will over environment. Eventually your breathing slows again. The shivering stops. The blankets have rewarmed. You're safe again for now until your bladder fills once more or morning arrives, whichever comes first. Now imagine you're pregnant. Because you probably are or have been or will be soon, that's part of your job description as a queen. Producing heirs is non-negotiable. And if you think winter nights are challenging under normal circumstances, try doing it while carrying a child and then horror of horrors actually giving birth in these conditions. Pregnancy changes everything about your cold survival strategy. Your body's working overtime supporting 2 lives instead of 1, which means you need more calories, more warmth, more everything. But you're also more vulnerable, more prone to complications, and medieval obstetrics is essentially educated guessing combined with prayer and hope. During pregnancy, you're actually warmer than usual. Your metabolism increases, your blood volume increases, your body is a furnace of activity. This sounds like an advantage in winter, and in some ways it is. You might need 1 fewer blanket, you might tolerate the chamber temperature slightly better. But it also means you sweat more, which creates moisture in your clothing, and bedding, which then makes you colder when you're not actively moving. The real nightmare is childbirth in winter. Royal births follow strict protocols. When you go into labour, your chamber is sealed, windows covered with heavy fabric, doors closed tight, every gap stuffed with cloth to prevent drafts. This is based on medical theory that says women in labour are especially vulnerable to cold air which could enter the womb and harm the baby or cause fever in the mother, so they seal the room completely. Which means whatever temperature your chamber is when labour starts is the temperature it's going to be for the next 12 or 20 or 36 hours, however long this takes. And they can't build up the fire too much because the medical texts also warn against excessive heat, which could cause different problems. So you're giving birth in a sealed stone room that's maybe 55 degrees in tremendous pain, while trying not to die from any of the dozen things that routinely killed women in childbirth. The midwives are there, of course, your ladies in waiting. Maybe a physician if your household employs one, though many queens preferred the midwives who had actual practical experience. These women cluster around you and their body heat helps a little, but birth is exhausting and you're sweating despite the cold, and the whole process is a fever dream of pain and temperature fluctuation and fear. There are records of winter births where the attending women complained bitterly about the cold, where the water brought for washing froze in its basin, where the newborn baby came out into air so cold that everyone panicked trying to warm it quickly enough. Babies die from cold exposure in their first hours. Everyone knows this. So the infant gets wrapped immediately in pre-warmed linens held close to the mother's body, or the midwife's body kept near whatever heat source exists. And then there's the postpartum period. You're supposed to stay in bed for weeks after giving birth. This is mandatory for queens, both for physical recovery and for ceremonial reasons. But staying in bed means you're not moving, not generating much body heat through activity. You're lying there, healing, bleeding, trying to nurse an infant, and you're cold. Constantly cold. The infant has its own survival challenges. Babies can't regulate their body temperature effectively. A newborn in a medieval chamber would die of hypothermia without constant intervention being held, constantly kept, wrapped, kept near warmth sources. There's a reason wealthy households employed wet nurses who could focus entirely on keeping the baby alive while the mother recovered. This wasn't just about feeding, it was about temperature management. Some queens lost babies to the cold. Not directly, nobody writes cause of death cold in medieval records, but babies who were weak, who couldn't thrive, who developed mysterious fevers or breathing problems that we might now recognise as cold stress complications. The infant mortality rate among royalty was lower than among peasants, but it was still horrifyingly high, and winter babies had worse survival rates than summer babies. There's a particularly devastating account from 1348 of a queen who gave birth in December during a particularly brutal cold snap. The baby lived 3 days. The chronicle doesn't give a specific cause, just notes that the child failed to thrive and died. Reading between the lines, knowing what we know about temperature and infant survival, it's not hard to guess what happened. Even if you survive childbirth and the baby survives infancy, there are ongoing complications. Nursing in winter means exposing your breast to cold air multiple times per day, which is painful and increases infection risk. The baby needs to feed frequently, which means repeatedly opening your bedrobe, loosening your gown, creating gaps in your thermal protection. Every feeding is a small battle against the cold. Your chambers might have a special warming cradle for the baby, a wooden cradle with high sides, and a canopy lined with furs positioned as close to the fireplace as safely possible. The baby sleeps there when not feeding, monitored constantly by nurses whose entire job is making sure the infant doesn't die of cold, or fire, or any of the other threats lurking in a medieval chamber. Some queens requested smaller, more enclosed chambers for the postpartum period specifically because they were easier to keep warm. This required moving shortly after giving birth, which was its own ordeal, but the trade-off was worth it. A smaller room with a good fire could actually be kept tolerably warm. Your grand bedchamber with its vaulted ceiling and stone walls was nearly impossible. Historians still argue about whether medieval people understood the connection between cold and infant mortality. The medical texts don't explicitly make the link, but the practical measures they recommend, keeping babies wrapped, keeping them close to warm bodies, avoiding cold air exposure, suggest they understood something, even if they explained it using humour theory rather than thermodynamics. You're lying in bed now, not pregnant, not recovering from childbirth, just a normal winter night. But you've been through this before, maybe multiple times. You know what it's like to labour in a cold room, to worry about keeping a newborn alive through winter nights, to navigate the impossible balance between recovery and survival. Every queen who made it to spring with a living baby felt like she'd won a battle. Because she had. She'd fought cold and infection and medieval medicine and pure bad luck, and she'd won. The victory was temporary. There would be more pregnancies, more winters, more risks, but in that moment survival was enough. Bella shifts against your legs and you're grateful for her simple warmth, for not being pregnant right now, for not having an infant to worry about. Tonight is just about keeping yourself alive. That's challenging enough. Here's something that might surprise you. You don't actually stay in this castle all winter. Or rather, you try very hard not to. Because the people who built these magnificent fortresses understood something crucial. They're terrible places to live in January. Royal households practiced what historians call seasonal migration, though nobody called it that at the time. They just called it survival. The basic strategy: spend winter in the smallest, most defensible, most heatable residence you own, and only return to the grand castles when temperatures moderate. Your family probably owns multiple properties. The big impressive castle where you hold court and receive foreign dignitaries and demonstrate power that's a summer residence. The smaller manor house with lower ceilings and interior courtyards and rooms that can actually be kept warm, that's where you're supposed to spend December through February. But migration isn't simple. You can't just pack a bag and go. You're a queen. When you move, everything moves. Your bed, the massive four-poster survival fortress we've been discussing, gets disassembled and loaded onto wagons. Your tapestries come down from the walls, rolled carefully transported. Your clothing chests, your documents, your household goods, your servants, your dogs, everything that makes a space livable has to be packed, moved, and reassembled. The logistics are staggering. A royal household move might require 20 or 30 wagons, take 3 or 4 days to complete, and involve coordinating dozens of servants and guards and animals. And you have to do it in winter, which means travelling through cold and potentially snow and mud, and all the misery that medieval roads can offer. Some years you don't make it out before winter sets in. Weather turns suddenly, or political situations require your presence in the big castle, or someone gets sick, or a dozen other reasons keep you trapped in an architectural icebox when you should be somewhere more survivable. Those are the hard winters, the ones where you're fighting the building itself every single night. The smaller manor houses aren't comfortable by modern standards, but they're survivable in ways that castles aren't. Lower ceilings mean heat doesn't vanish upward. Smaller rooms mean your body heat and your fire actually warm the space. Timber construction instead of solid stone means some insulation, some protection from the cold radiating through walls. Interior layouts mean you can move between rooms without going outside or through exposed corridors. There's a manor house in your holdings, let's say it's about 40 miles from here, that has a great hall with sleeping quarters built directly above it. The hall has a massive fireplace that burns all day and into the night, and the heat rises through the floor into the chambers above. It's not warm exactly, but it's noticeably less cold. Sleeping there versus sleeping here is the difference between misery and manageable discomfort. But prestige matters. A queen can't just hide in a comfortable manor all winter. You have duties, appearances, expectations. Sometimes you have to be in the big castle, because that's where the political action is, where your husband is conducting business, where foreign visitors expect to find you. So you suffer. Prestige trumps comfort. Status trumps survival. This is the medieval way. There are chronicles documenting courts that moved midwinter out of desperation. One particularly brutal January, a French royal household abandoned their primary castle after 3 servants were found dead from cold. They packed up in a panic and moved to a smaller residence 20 miles away, and the whole court recognized this as a humiliating but necessary retreat. The castle had defeated them. Some castles were abandoned entirely during winter, with only skeleton staffs remaining to maintain security. The royal family would decamp to more livable quarters, and leave the castle to essentially hibernate fires, banked low, most rooms unheated, waiting for spring. This was practical but also politically awkward. An empty castle is a vulnerable castle. Enemies might see your absence as an opportunity. The smaller residences created their own problems. When you concentrate your entire household in a smaller space, you're living much closer to servants, courtiers, hangers-on. Privacy diminishes. Tensions increase. People who could avoid each other in a sprawling castle are now sharing corridors and hearing each other through thin walls. Winter quarters could be politically volatile just from proximity stress. Food supply also complicated seasonal migration. Large households consumed enormous quantities of food, and medieval storage and transportation meant you couldn't just move everything easily. You needed stores at each location, which required planning months in advance. Sometimes households arrived at winter quarters to discover the stores weren't adequate, which meant sending out foraging parties or making emergency purchases at inflated winter prices. Historians still argue whether seasonal migration was primarily about comfort or about practical resource management. Heating a castle required ridiculous amounts of firewood. Concentrating your household in a smaller building meant less wood consumption, which meant your forest resources lasted longer. The comfort was a side benefit of efficiency. Some queens loved their winter manners and dreaded returning to the grand castles. There are letters expressing this: "I must return to castle name in March and already I miss my little house," suggesting that once you've experienced survivable winters, going back to freezing in state chambers feels like punishment. But right now, tonight, you're here, in the big castle, in your grand bedchamber with its vaulted ceiling and stone walls and inadequate fireplace. Maybe you'll migrate to better quarters next month. Maybe you're stuck here all winter. Either way, you have to survive tonight first. The knowledge that better options exist somewhere makes it both easier and harder. Easier because you know this isn't inevitable. There are buildings where winter is less brutal. Harder because you're not in one of those buildings right now, and thinking about what you're missing doesn't make the cold around you any warmer. Margaret has fallen asleep near the fire. Alice is deeply unconscious at your feet. The dogs are motionless, warm lumps against your body. The chamber exists in its cold darkness beyond your curtains, and tomorrow morning you'll wake and begin another day of maintaining appearances, performing queenship, existing in spaces designed for defense rather than comfort. But that's tomorrow. Tonight you're still here, still surviving, counting the hours until dawn in a building that was never meant to love you back. Let's talk about the alternative sleeping arrangement that some queens eventually resort to when their magnificent private chambers become unbearable, sleeping in the Great Hall. This is technically a step down in status, but it might be a step up in survival, and that trade-off gets more appealing as winter deepens. The Great Hall is the heart of the castle, a massive communal space where the household eats, conducts business, receives guests, and sometimes sleeps. It has the largest fireplace in the building, big enough to roast entire animals, fed constantly throughout the day and banked carefully at night. Unlike your bedchamber's decorative fire, the Great Hall fire is serious infrastructure. It's meant to warm a space, and it actually does, at least partially. During the day, the hall is crowded, and public servants moving about, courtiers conducting business, dogs, underfoot noise echoing off the high ceiling. But at night, after the evening meal is cleared and the trestle tables are taken down or pushed aside, the hall transforms into a sleeping space for portions of the household. Lower-ranking servants, guards, hangers-on, they roll out pallets, or simply wrap themselves in cloaks and sleep on the rush-covered floor arranged in rough circles around the fire. Now imagine you a queen joining them. It happens. Not often and not officially, but it happens. On the coldest nights when your chamber feels like a stone tomb, and you've already made one trip to the frozen garderobe, and you're contemplating another, and you just can't face it on those nights, some queens abandon privacy for warmth. You'd bring your own arrangements, of course. A queen doesn't sleep on the floor like a servant. Maybe a portable bed gets set up near the hall fire, or maybe there's a raised platform or alcove where you can maintain some separation from the masses. Your ladies-in-waiting would accompany you, creating a small royal island in the sea of sleeping bodies. But fundamentally, you're giving up the isolation of your private chamber for the communal warmth of shared space and shared fire. The temperature difference is immediately noticeable. The Great Hall with dozens of sleeping bodies and that massive fire stays maybe 10 or 15 degrees warmer than your bedchamber. 10 degrees doesn't sound like much, but when you're starting from 45 degrees versus 35 degrees, it's the difference between difficult sleep and dangerous exposure. The trade-off is privacy, or rather, the complete lack of it. In the Great Hall, you're surrounded by snoring, coughing, farting, sleep-talking humanity. Someone's dog wanders over and sniffs your face at 3 a.m. A servant has a nightmare and cries out. A guard shifts position and his armour clanks. The fire pops and crackles all night. It's not quiet, it's not private, but it's noticeably warmer, and warmth can trump a lot of inconveniences. Some halls have galleries or upper levels where higher status people can sleep raised platforms that provide both physical and symbolic elevation above the common sleepers below. You might claim one of these spaces, maintaining the appearance of hierarchy while still benefiting from the hall's communal warmth. You're sleeping in the same room as servants, but you're not sleeping with them. The distinction matters politically, even if it doesn't matter thermally. There are practical advantages beyond warmth. In the Great Hall, you're never alone if you need something. If you need water, someone's awake to fetch it. If you need to visit the guardrobe, and yes, you still have to make that freezing journey, but at least you don't have to navigate dark corridors alone, someone can accompany you with a torch. The hall provides a kind of collective security that private chambers lack. The smell is intense. Dozens of unwashed bodies, dogs smoke from the fire food odours, lingering from dinner rushes on the floor that haven't been changed in weeks. The Great Hall has a particular aroma that takes some getting used to. Your private chamber smells like smoke and dogs too, but at least they're your smoke and your dogs. The hall smells like everyone's everything. Historians still argue whether queens sleeping in great halls was common or rare. The records are sparse because nobody wanted to document this as standard practice. It suggests either poverty can't afford to heat proper chambers, or architectural failure castle doesn't work as intended. But there are enough oblique references in chronicles and letters to suggest it happened more than official records indicate. A letter from 1367 mentions a queen taking her rest near the hall fire due to illness, which probably means she was cold and decided warmth was more important than dignity. A chronicle from 1401 notes that during a particularly harsh winter, all persons of the household slept in common warmth, which likely includes higher status members who normally wouldn't. The psychological aspect is interesting. Sleeping communally connects you to your household in ways that private chambers prevent. You hear their snores, witness their vulnerability, share their discomfort. Some queens found this reassuring, a reminder that everyone was suffering together, that cold was a universal enemy requiring collective response. Other queens found it intolerable and returned to their freezing chambers after one attempt, preferring isolation to intimacy. Children and elderly members of the household often defaulted to hall sleeping. Children because they couldn't maintain body temperature as effectively and needed extra warmth. Elderly because they were more vulnerable to cold exposure and the household wanted them near fire and near help if something went wrong. If you saw someone very young or very old sleeping in their private chamber during deep winter, you'd worry about them. The communal sleeping arrangement also had defensive advantages. An assassin trying to reach you in the Great Hall would have to step over dozens of sleeping bodies, any of whom might wake and raise alarm. Your private chamber, for all its locked doors and guard posts, was isolated and potentially vulnerable. The hall provided protection through sheer numbers. Some castles had intermediate options, smaller heated rooms off the Great Hall, or parlours with good fireplaces where a handful of people could sleep more comfortably than in private chambers, but more privately than in the full hall. These were prize spaces assigned based on status and need. If you could claim one of these rooms, you'd solved the winter sleeping problem as well as medieval architecture allowed. But most nights you're in your chamber, because you're a queen, and queens sleep in royal chambers regardless of how cold they are. Sleeping in the hall is emergency protocol, not standard practice. It's an admission that architecture has defeated dignity, and you make that admission as rarely as possible. Tonight you're in your bed behind your curtains, maintaining standards. The Great Hall exists below you or elsewhere in the castle, warm and crowded and smelling of humanity. And maybe you think about it sometimes, about trading privacy for warmth, status for comfort, but you don't go. You stay here in your fortress bed with your servants and dogs fighting the cold with textiles and body heat and sheer, stubborn royal endurance. Now let's venture into the stranger side of medieval winter survival, the folk remedies, the superstitions, the prayers and the rituals that exist in the blurry space between medicine and magic. Because when architecture and textiles fail, people turn to whatever else they can find, including things that make no scientific sense, but provide psychological comfort which might be its own form of warmth. Under your pillow right now there's probably a small cloth bundle. Inside, dried herbs. specifically a mixture that might include mugwort, chamomile, lavender, and vervain. These herbs are believed to promote warm sleep, to ward off nightmares, to protect against evil spirits that thrive in cold and darkness. Do they work? The lavender smells pleasant. The chamomile might have mild sedative properties. The rest is placebo and prayer, but medieval people don't distinguish between physical and spiritual remedies. If it makes you feel safer, it's working. Some queens place warming herbs directly in their beds, bundles of dried ginger root wrapped in cloth, or small bags of peppercorns, or even garlic cloves despite the smell. The logic is sympathetic magic. Warm things produce warmth. Ginger burns on your tongue, therefore it must contain heat that can be released into your sleeping space. This is not how thermodynamics works, but it is how medieval medical theory works, and the belief itself might help you relax enough to sleep better. There are prayers specifically for protection during winter nights. Your household priest probably taught you several, and you might recite them before bed, either silently or in a whisper that Alice and Margaret can hear. Something like, "Lord, wrap me in your warmth as you wrapped the infant Christ in swaddling. Let not the cold of night enter my body as you let not death enter your holy heart." These prayers serve multiple functions: spiritual insurance, bedtime ritual, psychological comfort, and reminder that you're not fighting the cold alone. God is presumably on your side, though his track record on preventing winter deaths is admittedly mixed. Some households practice elaborate blessing rituals for the bedchamber. A priest comes in before you sleep and blesses the four corners of the room, the fireplace, the bed itself, sprinkling holy water and reciting Latin prayers. This is supposed to sanctify the space, making it resistant to cold spirits and night demons who bring illness and death. Does holy water insulate stone walls? No. Does the ritual provide a sense of order and protection in a chaotic, dangerous situation? Absolutely. There's a folk belief that certain saints offer special protection against cold. St. Agnes, whose feast day is January 24, is associated with winter survival, possibly because her name comes from the Latin word for lamb, and lambs symbolize warmth and innocence. Some queens keep a small statue or painting of St. Agnes near their beds, asking for her intercession through the coldest months. St. Blay, whose feast is February 3rd, protects against throat ailments that cold weather brings. You might have both saints represented in your chamber, a spiritual insurance policy against winter's threats. Amulets are common, though the church officially disapproves of anything too pagan. Small carved stones worn on a cord around your neck, supposedly containing heat-retaining properties. Pieces of amber, which is warm to the touch, and therefore must contain trapped fire. A tiny vial of blessed oil that you dab on your wrists and throat before bed, creating a barrier against cold entering your body. These practices exist in the grey area between Christianity and older beliefs, and most people practice both without seeing contradiction. There's a particularly strange remedy that appears in several medieval medical texts: sleeping with bread. Not eating bread before bed, we already discussed food consumption, but literally placing a loaf of bread in your bed, usually near your feet. The theory involves bread's ability to absorb moisture and generate mild heat through yeast activity. Does this work? A fresh loaf might produce tiny amounts of heat from residual fermentation, but not enough to make any real difference. But people swear by it, and the bread can be eaten in the morning, so it's multi-purpose survival strategy. Some queens consult with wise women unofficial healers who know plant lore and traditional remedies that don't appear in official medical texts. These women might recommend stranger things: sleeping with a copper coin in your mouth to balance humours, or placing iron nails under the mattress to ground cold energy, or burning specific wood combinations in the fire to produce warming smoke. The church disapproves of wise women, considering them dangerously close to witchcraft, but queens use them anyway because sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. There are rituals around the fire itself. Before Margaret banks it for the night, she might make the sign of the cross over the flames 3 times, asking God to keep them burning until morning. Some households throw salt into the fire while reciting protective verses. Others won't allow the fire to be started with flint on certain cursed days of the winter calendar. Fire is sacred, fire is life, and treating it with ritual respect makes sense even if the specific rituals are arbitrary. Mirrors are covered at night in some households. The belief is that mirrors can trap heat, or reflect it back out of the room, and you want to keep all possible warmth contained. This probably doesn't affect room temperature, but it does affect psychology. Covering mirrors makes the chamber feel more enclosed, more protected, more cave-like, and cave-like is good when you're trying to survive the night. Some queens won't sleep with their heads pointing north, believing that aligns your body with cold currents from the northern regions. Others insist on east-facing beds to catch the first rays of sunrise, which supposedly brings warmth into your dreams. These orientations are taken seriously during bed setup with servants using primitive compasses or architectural features to ensure proper alignment. There's a folk tradition of lending heat through prayer. If you're warm enough, you can pray for your warmth to be shared with others who are suffering. Some queens practice this whispering prayers for the poor, sleeping in the streets, the travellers caught in snow, the soldiers on night watch. It doesn't actually transfer heat, obviously, but it creates spiritual solidarity and might help you feel less guilty about your relative privilege. Historians still argue whether these practices had any practical effect or were purely psychological. Modern science would say psychological, but medieval people didn't separate mind and body the way we do. If believing that St. Agnes is protecting you helps you relax enough to sleep better, then St. Agnes did protect you in a sense. The mechanism doesn't matter, the outcome does. You've probably participated in some of these rituals tonight without consciously thinking about them. The herb bundle under your pillow, a quick prayer before the curtains closed. Maybe you touched the small amber amulet you wear on a cord. These actions are so ingrained in your bedtime routine that they're automatic muscle memory combined with spiritual practice. Do they keep you warmer? No, not physically. But they give structure to fear, they transform chaos into manageable ritual, and they remind you that humans have fought winter for thousands of years, using every tool available, physical, mental, spiritual and magical. And when the cold presses in from all sides, and the night feels endless, and your faith in blankets and fires wavers, having something else to believe in, saint or herb or prayer, makes the darkness slightly less dark. Morning is coming, but not yet. Right now, it's maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, that deepest, coldest part of night, when the fire is at its lowest. Your body heat has been slowly draining into the mattress for hours, and even your elaborate survival systems are struggling. This is when Margaret wakes up. She's trained herself to surface from sleep at intervals throughout the night, some internal clock that knows when the fire needs attention. She opens her eyes in the darkness near the hearth, doesn't move for a moment. Moving means exposing herself to cold air, and then commits. She throws off her blanket and stands in one quick motion, gasping at the temperature shock. The chamber is deeply cold now, maybe 35 degrees. The fire has burned down to a small bed of glowing coals, barely producing light, let alone heat. If it goes out completely, everyone in this room could be in genuine danger by dawn. Margaret grabs a piece of wood from the stack near her pallet. She keeps it close specifically so she doesn't have to walk across the freezing floor and places it carefully on the coals. Nothing happens at first. The wood sits there, dark and inert. Margaret blows gently on the coals and they brighten from dull red to orange. A tiny flame appears, licks at the wood, vanishes. She blows again. Another flame slightly larger. The wood begins to catch. Within 2 or 3 minutes there's actual fire again, small but growing, pushing back against the darkness and cold. Margaret stays crouched by the fire for a few extra seconds, soaking up warmth before returning to her pallet. This is her moment, the brief period where she's closest to the heat source, where she can thaw her hands and face before going back to her cold sleeping spot. She's been doing this job for years, and these stolen moments of warmth are her payment for the service of keeping everyone else alive. Inside your bed curtains, you're not fully asleep. You've been drifting in and out for hours, never quite achieving deep sleep because your body's too busy monitoring threats. Cold bladder pressure, strange noises, the weight of blankets restricting movement. This is normal for medieval sleep. The idea of sleeping 8 uninterrupted hours won't become standard until the industrial era. Right now, sleep is fragmented, cautious, defensive. You might be in what historians call the first sleep. Medieval people typically slept in 2 segments, first sleep and second sleep, with a wakeful period in between around midnight or 1 in the morning. During that wakeful period, people would pray, talk quietly, have sex, or just lie there thinking. It wasn't insomnia, it was normal. Second sleep would come afterward, carrying you toward dawn. But this pattern is complicated by cold. Sometimes you're too cold to fall into second sleep properly. You're awake, but you can't get up because leaving bed is unthinkable, so you just lie there aware of every discomfort, the spot where your hip presses into the mattress, the slight dampness in your wool gown from accumulated sweat, Bella's weight against your legs, that's somehow both comforting and restrictive. Your mind wanders during these wakeful periods. You think about political situations, family members' problems that need solving tomorrow. You remember summers, the shocking, almost forgotten sensation of being warm, of wearing light fabrics, of sleeping without fear. Summer feels fictional right now, like a story someone told you, but that never actually existed. Alice shifts at your feet, making a small sound, not quite awake, not quite asleep. She's probably cold too, even with the residual heat from the stones and your body warmth. Her thin blanket is inadequate, but it's what she has, and she's learned not to complain. Complaining doesn't make blankets warmer. It just annoys people with the power to make your life harder. Bella has moved during the night. She started behind your knees but has gradually migrated upward, and now she's pressed against your lower back, a warm, lumpy presence that's simultaneously uncomfortable and necessary. You consider pushing her back to her original position, but that would require moving, which would create gaps in your blanket layers, which would let in cold air. Better to tolerate her current location. Somewhere in the castle, a bell rings. Not loud muffled by stone walls and distance, but audible. It's the chapel bell for Lord's the pre-dawn prayer service. A few extremely devout members of the household will drag themselves out of warm sleeping spaces to attend. You're not required to be one of them. Queens are permitted to pray from bed, and God surely understands that frozen queens are less useful than living ones. You whisper a prayer anyway, something brief and familiar words you've said 10,000 times. The Latin flows automatically, Domine labia mea aperis. Lord, open my lips. The prayer creates a small ritual in the darkness, a reminder that you're connected to something larger than this cold chamber, this temporary suffering. The window, that narrow slit in the stone wall, shows the faintest lightning. Not sunrise, not yet, but the approaching promise of it. Dawn in winter comes late, maybe 7 or 8 in the morning, depending on the month, but even the hint of its approach feels like victory. You've almost made it, almost survived another night. Your bladder is making demands again. You've been ignoring it for maybe an hour, hoping you could hold out until there was enough light to make the guardrobe trip less terrifying, but it's becoming insistent. You're going to have to go. The internal debate begins: go now while it's still dark, or wait another 30 minutes for slightly more light and slightly warmer temperatures. Both options are terrible. You decide to wait. 30 more minutes won't kill you probably. You shift positions slightly, trying to ease the pressure, and one of your legs escapes from the blanket cocoon for just a second before you pull it back. That 1 second of cold air exposure is shocking, a reminder that the outer chamber hasn't warmed at all during the night, that dawn brings light but not heat. Margaret has returned to her pallet, the fire is rebuilding itself slowly, and the chamber exists in that strange pre-dawn state where night is ending but day hasn't begun. You're in limbo, waiting, enduring, counting down to morning with every breath. This is how winter nights end, not dramatically, not with revelation or transformation, but gradually, stubbornly, 1 cold minute at a time. You survive not because you're strong or special, but because you refuse to stop surviving. Because morning always comes even when the night feels eternal, and when the first real sunlight finally touches your window, weak and pale and barely warm, you'll feel something like gratitude. You've made it again. 1 more night survived. 1 more small victory against the cold. Now let's talk about how everyone else sleeps. The villagers, the peasants, the people who don't have your tapestries or warming pans or 4-poster fortresses. Because winter is cold for everyone, and understanding how the other 99% survive makes your own situation feel simultaneously more privileged and more universally human. Village houses are small, shockingly small by modern standards, maybe 1 or 2 rooms for an entire family. But smallness is an advantage in winter. Less volume to heat means body warmth and fire heat actually accumulate, instead of vanishing into vast stone spaces. A peasant family of 6 or 7 people sleeping in 1 room creates significant warmth just through collective body heat. They sleep together, not metaphorically, literally together. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, possibly a servant if the family is prosperous enough, all sharing sleeping platforms or piled together on straw mattresses on the floor. Privacy doesn't exist, personal space is impossible, but the thermal efficiency is remarkable. 7 bodies in close proximity can raise the ambient temperature of a small enclosed space by 10 or 15 degrees. They're using each other as heating systems. The animals help too. Peasant houses often have livestock living in the same structure: cows, goats, pigs, chickens. Sometimes there's a partition between human space and animal space, sometimes not. The animals are kept inside primarily to protect them from theft and predators, but they also contribute body heat. A cow produces an enormous amount of warmth. Having 3 or 4 cows sleeping 10 feet away from your family bed makes a measurable difference. The smell must be incredible. Unwashed humans, animal waste, smoke from the fire-damp straw cooking odours, all trapped in an enclosed space with minimal ventilation. But nobody complains about smell when the alternative is freezing to death. Smell is a luxury concern. Survival is pragmatic. Their beds are nothing like yours. Maybe a wooden platform raised slightly off the floor, stuffed with straw, or dried heather, or whatever plant material is locally available. One wool blanket, if they're lucky, may be supplemented with old cloaks or animal hides. The whole family shares this blanket. It stretches across all of them, and people sleep pressed together to maximize coverage and warmth. Children sleep in the middle, surrounded by adults. This is both warmth strategy and protection. The coldest positions are the edges, so adults take those spots, using their bodies as barriers to keep children warm. Elderly family members, if they're still alive, might get middle positions too, because everyone knows old people can't maintain body heat as effectively. Some families sleep in their day clothes just like you do. They might add an extra layer or remove outer garments that are too dirty or damp, but the concept is the same: clothing as bedding fabric, as survival technology. They don't have multiple wool gowns like you do. They might have one set of clothing, period, so they sleep in it and it doubles as blanket. The fire in a peasant house is different from your chamber fire. It's not in a grand fireplace with a chimney. It's often just a hearth, a designated area in the centre, or against one wall where fire burns on the floor with smoke escaping through a hole in the roof or through the thatch itself. This is wildly inefficient and creates constant smoke exposure, but it's what they have. That central fire stays burning all winter if possible. Letting it go out is a crisis because restarting it requires effort, striking flint, coaxing tinder-building flame from scratch. Much easier to keep it going continuously, feeding it constantly with small pieces of fuel. The fire becomes the heart of the house in literal and symbolic ways. Life revolves around it. Fuel is a constant concern. Wealthy households like yours have forests and wood supplies managed by servants. Peasants have to gather fuel themselves, deadwood from forest-dried peat animal dung mixed with straw and dried into bricks. Anything that burns gets used. In the coldest months, entire days are spent gathering fuel just to stay ahead of consumption. Some villages have communal sleeping arrangements in the worst weather. Everyone crowds into the largest building, maybe the church or a barn, sharing body heat and fire, sleeping in a massive pile of humanity. It's not comfortable, but it's survival. Individual houses might be impossible to heat adequately, but 50 people in one space creates meaningful warmth. Historians still argue whether peasants were actually more comfortable than nobles during winter sleep. The counterintuitive answer might be yes sometimes. Their smaller spaces, communal sleeping and proximity to animals created thermal efficiency that grand chambers couldn't match. They were poorer in every material way, but thermodynamically they might have been warmer. But they also died more frequently. Infant mortality was higher among peasants. Elderly people succumbed to winter illnesses more often, and entire families sometimes perished in harsh winters when fuel ran out or food supplies failed. Your survival rate is better, even if your comfort level isn't dramatically higher. Privilege means access to resources that create redundancy. If one heating strategy fails, you have others. Peasants have fewer backup options. There's also the nutrition factor. You eat better, which means your body has more fuel to convert to heat. Peasants in winter are often surviving on gruel and bread, minimal protein, barely enough calories. Their bodies are trying to maintain temperature without adequate fuel. You at least have the mulled wine, the honey, the meat from dinner. Your internal furnace is better fed. Some peasant children don't survive their first winter. They're born in autumn, and by February they're dead, not from specific illness, but from the cumulative stress of cold, inadequate nutrition, and underdeveloped immune systems. Nobody writes chronicles about these deaths. They're too common to be remarkable. But every winter takes its toll on the youngest and weakest. The elderly face similar risks. An old man who survived 60 winters might not survive the 61st, not because that winter is worse, but because his body has finally depleted its reserves. He goes to sleep one night in the communal family bed surrounded by children and warmth, and simply doesn't wake up. The family grieves, but they also understand. Winter claims everyone eventually. Despite the hardships, there's something almost enviable about communal peasant sleep. The complete lack of isolation, the guaranteed human contact. You sleep alone well with servants and dogs, but alone in your status, separated by curtains and hierarchy. They sleep in piles, connected, sharing breath and warmth and vulnerability. Your survival strategy is architectural and textile-based building barriers between yourself and cold. Their survival strategy is communal and biological, using bodies, and proximity and shared resources. Neither approach is comfortable. Both approaches sometimes fail, but they represent different philosophies of winter survival, and neither group would want to trade places. You lie in your bed now thinking about those village houses, those piled families, those children sleeping between their parents. You'll never experience that kind of collective warmth, that loss of boundaries between self and others. Your rank prevents it. But on the coldest nights, when your elaborate preparations still leave you shivering, you wonder if maybe they have something figured out that all your tapestries and warming pans can't replicate. The warmth of belonging, the heat of humanity pressed together with no pretense, no hierarchy, just bodies fighting cold as a unit. It's not romantic, it's desperate and smelly and uncomfortable. But it's also profoundly human in ways that your isolated fortress bed isn't. Morning is closer now. The window shows definite lightening. Both you and those peasant families are approaching the same dawn, having survived the same night through different means. The cold didn't distinguish between queen and peasant. You both endured. You both won for one more night. Let's talk about the winters that people still whisper about decades later, the ones that killed, the ones that broke records, the ones that made even survival strategies we've discussed seem inadequate. Because most winters are hard, but some winters are legendary in their brutality. The winter of 1234 is still mentioned in chronicles 70 years later. Rivers froze solid across Europe, not just the surfaces, but deep enough that fully loaded carts could cross on ice. The Thames in London became a highway. Wine froze in storage casks and had to be cut out in chunks. Birds fell from the sky, mid-flight, frozen before they hit the ground. And yes, people died in their beds despite every preparation. There's a documented account from that winter of a French duchess who went to sleep wearing 2 fur cloaks under her normal pile of blankets, with 3 servants sleeping in her chamber fire burning all night. She woke screaming because her feet had gone numb, not cold numb. Frostbite. Inside her bedchamber. Inside a castle. Her ladies had to rub her feet for an hour to restore circulation, and she lost 2 toes eventually. The cold had found her despite everything. The winter of 1309 lasted from October through May, 8 months of winter. Chronicles describe people losing hope around February, realizing that spring wasn't coming on schedule, that they'd have to endure months more than expected. Fuel supplies ran out. Food stores depleted. Animals died. And every night people went to bed wondering if this would be the night they didn't wake up. In that winter there are records of queens sleeping in their daytime furs, adding them on top of all their regular bedding. There are accounts of servants fainting from smoke inhalation, because chambers were sealed completely to trap any possible warmth. Some nobles abandoned their castles entirely and fled south, taking their households to France or Spain or anywhere warmer, and some of those who stayed didn't survive. One particularly chilling account, no pun intended, describes a castle in Germany where the entire household moved into the kitchen. The kitchen had multiple ovens that were kept burning constantly for bread production, and it was the only room that stayed above freezing. The queen, her ladies, servants, guards, maybe 50 people total, lived in that kitchen for 2 solid months. They slept on the floor, cooked at conducted business, all in one smoke-filled room because it was the only survivable space. The winter of 1358 brought what chroniclers called the Great Frost. Ice formed on the interior walls of heated chambers, not just condensation, but actual ice sheets centimetres thick. People woke to find their breath had frozen on their blankets during the night. There are letters describing having to break ice off bed curtains in the morning, ice on fabric inside the room. In Winchester, England, that winter, a noblewoman's chamber servant was found dead at her post near the fire. She'd been tending the flames overnight, and at some point nobody knows when she simply stopped waking up to add wood. The fire went out, the temperature plummeted, and by morning she was frozen in a sitting position. The queen she was serving survived because she had more blankets, but the trauma of that discovery stayed with her. She mentioned it in letters for years afterward. The winter of 1432 saw what historians call the children's winter. Infant and child mortality spiked dramatically. Families went to sleep with healthy toddlers and woke to find them cold and unresponsive victims of hypothermia that crept in during the night. The chroniclers don't give specific numbers, Medieval record-keeping wasn't that precise, but they describe widespread grief villages where every family lost someone. Some winters brought a specific phenomenon chroniclers called chamber frost, decorative ice patterns that formed on the interior surfaces of rooms, creating beautiful and terrifying artwork. Frost would creep across tapestries, up bedposts, along ceiling beams like some winter spirit claiming territory. You'd wake surrounded by crystalline beauty that was actively trying to kill you. There are accounts of people sleeping in groups of 10 or 15 in rooms designed for 4, just piling together in desperate attempts to share body heat. Status and propriety went out the window, or rather stayed very much inside the window because opening windows would be suicidal. Queens sleeping surrounded by servants not for service but for survival. Everyone becomes equal when cold gets severe enough. Historians still argue about whether these extreme winters were truly worse than others, or whether they just got documented more thoroughly because dramatic events make better chronicles. But the details are too consistent across too many sources to be exaggeration. These winters happened. People suffered through them, or didn't, and the ones who survived carried the memories forever. The winter of 1461 is called the Year of the Frozen Queen. In some texts, though historians debate whether this is literal or metaphorical, a queen in her late 20s named lost to history or deliberately obscured or reportedly never recovered from that winter. She survived physically, but developed what we might now call PTSD around cold. She refused to sleep in normal chambers afterward, insisting on smaller, more enclosed spaces. She had anxiety attacks when temperatures dropped. She died 2 years later from unrelated causes, but the chronicles remember her as someone wintered broken. Some castles were abandoned after particularly brutal winters deemed uninhabitable. The architectural flaws that were tolerable in normal years became lethal in extreme years, and families decided not to risk it again. These buildings still exist in some places, empty stone shells that defeated their inhabitants' monuments to the limits of medieval survival technology. Your castle has survived its share of brutal winters. There are marks on the stones, places where ice damaged mortar, where frost caused cracks, where water froze and expanded and weakened structures. The building bears scars from battles with winter, and not all those battles were victories. Some sections were rebuilt after cold-related damage. Some modifications were made after winters that killed people. You lie in bed now thinking about those legendary winters, grateful that this is just a normal hard winter, and not one of the historical nightmares. Your toes are cold but not numb. Your chamber is uncomfortable but not lethal. You're going to survive this night and probably tomorrow night, and the nights after that until spring. But knowing those extreme winters existed, knowing that sometimes all the preparations and textiles and fires and prayers aren't enough, adds a layer of tension to every winter night. Because you can't know for certain that this year won't become one of those years. You can't guarantee that tonight's cold won't deepen into legendary cold, into chronicle-worthy cold, into the kind of cold that people whisper about generations later. You survive on hope that this is a survivable winter. Most winters are. Most nights end in mourning. But the exceptions exist, documented and frightening, reminding you that winter is not just uncomfortable, it's actively hostile and sometimes it wins. The window shows real light now. Dawn is genuinely arriving. This night is ending in the normal way with mourning rather than tragedy. You've made it through another one and the relief is profound and private and mixed with exhaustion. One more night survived. One more day to prepare for the next one. So why didn't they fix it? That's the question that haunts anyone studying medieval domestic life. Why did generations of queens and nobles and wealthy people sleep in freezing chambers when they clearly had the resources to build something better? Why didn't architecture evolve faster to solve this obvious recurring deadly problem? The answer is complicated, frustrating, and reveals a lot about how medieval society thought about comfort, status, and change. First, there's the fundamental issue that castles weren't built for comfort. They were built for defense. Every architectural choice prioritized military function over domestic livability. Those thick walls that radiate cold, they stop arrows and battering rams. Those high ceilings that trap heat uselessly, they prevent fire from spreading and provide space for defensive platforms. Those narrow windows that let in drafts, they're designed for archers, not illumination. Suggesting that castles should be redesigned for warmth would be like suggesting they should be redesigned for beauty at the expense of defense. It was unthinkable. Security trumped everything, and comfort was something you had to figure out within the constraints of military architecture. The building came first, your sleep came second. There's also the issue of technological limitation. Medieval builders didn't understand thermodynamics. They couldn't explain why heat rises or how air circulation works or what insulation actually does at a molecular level. They worked from observation and tradition, which meant innovation was slow and often accidental. Someone might notice that a certain room seemed warmer than others and try to replicate its features, but without understanding the underlying principles, success was inconsistent. Chimneys were actually a relatively recent innovation in your time period. Earlier castles just had holes in ceilings for smoke to escape, which meant you couldn't really have enclosed chambers with fires at all. The development of the chimney, a structure that channels smoke upward, while theoretically keeping warm air in the room, was considered cutting-edge technology. The fact that it didn't work very well didn't diminish people's enthusiasm for it. It was better than the alternative, so it became standard, and then people stopped innovating. There's a conservative mindset at work too. This is how chambers have always been built, is a powerful argument against change. Your ancestors slept in cold rooms, their ancestors slept in cold rooms, and you'll sleep in cold rooms too. Suggesting dramatic architectural changes implied that previous generations had been doing it wrong, which was insulting to family legacy and tradition. Innovation was suspect, continuity was valued. Cost was definitely a factor, but probably less than you'd think. Wealthy families could afford renovations. They spent fortunes on tapestries and clothing and imported luxuries. But renovation was complex. It meant tearing apart existing structures, potentially weakening defences, disrupting household routines for months or years. The immediate cost and the inconvenience often outweighed the long-term benefits in comfort. Some innovations did happen, but slowly and inconsistently. Glazed windows were an improvement over open shutters. Tapestries helped more than bare stone walls. Some later medieval buildings experimented with smaller chambers, lower ceilings, better fireplace designs. But these changes happened over centuries, not years, and they happened unevenly across regions and social classes. There's also a weird status issue. Suffering in a grand chamber was more prestigious than being comfortable in a small one. A massive cold bedchamber announced your wealth and power in ways that a cosy heated room couldn't. Guests who saw your soaring ceilings and vast spaces understood your importance. If you admitted that you'd prefer a smaller, warmer room, you'd be admitting that comfort mattered more than status, and that was socially dangerous. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely didn't mind the cold, or whether they just developed psychological coping mechanisms. Some sources suggest that people were so accustomed to discomfort that they didn't recognize it as abnormal. If you've never experienced a warm bedroom, you don't know what you're missing. Your baseline for acceptable is calibrated to your experience. But the letters and chronicles make clear that people knew they were suffering. They complained about cold. They described it as painful and dangerous. They took elaborate precautions to survive it. They definitely knew it was a problem. They just didn't have the technological understanding, cultural flexibility, or political will to fundamentally solve it. Religious ideology played a role too. Suffering was considered spiritually valuable. Comfort was suspect, potentially sinful, definitely soft. A queen who complained too much about her cold chamber might be seen as weak or self-indulgent. Better to suffer with dignity to offer up your discomfort as prayer, to demonstrate that you weren't dependent on physical comfort. This ideology discouraged people from aggressively pursuing solutions. There were also practical obstacles. Heating technology required fuel, and fuel required resources, forests, labour, transportation, storage. A more thoroughly heated castle would consume dramatically more wood, which meant more environmental impact, more expense, more complexity. Some regions didn't have adequate fuel supplies to support better heating, even if the technology existed. The social structure itself was an obstacle. The people who experienced the cold most directly, servants, lower-ranking household members, had no power to change anything. The people with power to mandate architectural changes, nobles, heads of households, experienced somewhat less severe cold because they had better chambers, more servants, more resources. The gap between problem and authority meant solutions were never quite urgent enough. And there's inertia. Castles lasted for generations. The building you're sleeping in tonight was probably built 50 or 100 years ago, and it'll probably still be standing 50 years from now. Once architecture is in place, changing it requires enormous effort. Easier to adapt yourself to the building than to rebuild the building around your needs. Some regions did better than others. Mediterranean castles had less severe winters and different architectural traditions. Eastern European builders developed some heating innovations, tile stoves, heated floors in some cases that Northern and Western Europe didn't adopt. But these solutions didn't spread widely because buildings are local and construction knowledge was passed down through regional apprenticeship systems rather than documented and shared internationally. By your area, some people are starting to prioritize domestic comfort more. Merchant families building new houses sometimes choose warmth over grand scale. Some nobles are experimenting with manor houses that are explicitly designed for living rather than defense. But this is a slow cultural shift, and it's happening at the margins of society rather than the center. You're living through a transition period where people recognize that cold chambers are miserable, but haven't fully committed to solving the problem systematically. Your grandchildren, if they're lucky, might sleep in somewhat better designed spaces, but you're stuck with medieval architecture at its most defensively magnificent and domestically hostile. The frustrating truth is that medieval people could have built warmer buildings. They had the materials, the labor, the resources. What they lacked was the conceptual framework that prioritized thermal comfort over other values, the scientific understanding to optimize designs, and the cultural permission to dramatically break from tradition. So you suffer in your magnificent chamber because magnificence mattered more than warmth, because defense mattered more than comfort, because tradition mattered more than innovation, because nobody with power cared quite enough to revolutionize domestic architecture. And tomorrow night you'll do it all again. It's time. Morning has arrived not in a burst of warmth or relief, but gradually reluctantly like it wasn't entirely sure it wanted to come back. The window shows pale grey light now enough to see outlines and shapes. The chamber is still cold. Morning doesn't fix that. But you've survived, and that's what matters. Margaret wakes fully if she was ever truly asleep. She rises from her pallet near the fire and begins the morning routine, adding larger pieces of wood to build the flames back up, opening the heavy curtains that covered the window overnight, moving quietly so as not to disturb you prematurely, though she knows you're probably already awake. You've been drifting at the edge of consciousness for the past hour, not quite sleeping, not quite waking, existing in that liminal space where your body knows the night is ending, but isn't ready to commit to the day. Alice stirs at your feet. She's been awake for a while too, waiting for the signal that she can move, that her duties can begin. Her position at the foot of your bed means she's one of the first to feel when you shift, when your breathing changes, when morning transitions from theoretical to actual. She's cold, her thin blanket and position at the edge of the bed fortress mean she's been colder than you all night, but she doesn't complain. She never complains. You push back the bed curtains yourself just enough to let in light, and let out some of the accumulated breath-warm dog smell air that's been trapped inside your textile cave all night. The temperature difference is immediate and shocking, even though you knew it was coming. The chamber feels like a different world, vast and grey and unfriendly compared to the compressed warmth of your closed curtains. Bella stretches against your legs, making a sound that's half groan, half yawn. She's been awake too, probably for hours, but dogs are smart about conserving energy. She stayed pressed against your warmth, barely moving, waiting. Pip is already up, shaking himself, sniffing around the chamber, tail wagging, because morning means activity, and activity is always better than the static waiting of night. Your body aches. This is normal. Sleeping in multiple layers of wool pinned under heavy blankets, barely moving all night to preserve warmth, it creates stiffness and soreness. Your hips hurt where they pressed into the mattress. Your shoulders are tight. Your neck has that particular pain that comes from sleeping slightly wrong, but not being able to adjust because adjustment means losing precious heat. Margaret approaches the bed with a basin of water. Not fresh water that would be freezing. This is water that's been sitting near the fire all night, warming slowly, reaching something approximating body temperature. You'll wash your face and hands with this tepid water, and even this modest gesture toward hygiene will feel cold because the air in the chamber is so much colder than the water, and evaporation is a cruel science. Alice has slipped out of the bed now, her feet hitting the floor with quiet determination. She'll help Margaret with the morning preparations, rebuilding the fire to full strength, laying out your clothing for the day, checking that everything's in order. She's moving stiffly too, her young body not immune to the cold's effects, but she's already learned to push through discomfort. That's the skill poverty teaches early. You sit up slowly, letting the blankets fall away in stages rather than all at once. Each layer you remove is a small surrender to the cold, a negotiation between staying protected and needing to begin the day. The bedrobe goes back on first you never fully removed it, and then you swing your legs out feeling for the small step stool with your wool-stockinged feet. Standing takes courage, it always does. Your body has been horizontal for 8 or 9 hours conserving heat, and now you're asking it to go vertical, to expose more surface area to cold air, to begin the work of being awake and functional. The floor is exactly as cold as you remembered, which is to say painfully cold, and your first steps are careful, awkward, like learning to walk again. The guardrobe calls because of course it does. Your bladder held out through the last few hours of night, but now it's insistent. This morning journey to the stone closet is somehow worse than the nighttime one, because you're more aware, less fuzzy with sleep, more conscious of every discomfort. The wooden seat has frost on it again, or still you're not sure if it ever thawed overnight or if it's fresh morning frost. Either way it's terrible and you endure it because biology doesn't negotiate. Back in the chamber, Margaret has laid out fresh undergarments. Or rather not fresh, because nothing is truly fresh in winter, but different undergarments that have been aired near the fire and are therefore slightly less saturated with yesterday's sweat and smoke. You'll put these on over your sleeping chemise, adding layers for day that are only slightly different from your layers for night. The morning dressing ritual will take 40 minutes or more, removing some layers, adding others, arranging everything properly for court or household duties or whatever the day demands. You'll move closer to the fire for this, taking advantage of its warmth, while you're temporarily more exposed. Your ladies-in-waiting will arrive soon if they haven't already to help with the complex business of noble dressing. But right now, in this quiet moment, you're just a person who survived another night. Not a queen, not a symbol, not a political figure, just a human who faced cold and darkness and came through to morning. Your survival wasn't guaranteed. Every winter night is a small risk. People die in their sleep from cold, from smoke, from mysterious failures of the body's heating system. But you didn't. You're here. You're standing. You're cold and sore and tired, but you're alive. Outside the castle is waking. You can hear distant sounds, servants moving through corridors, fires being built in other chambers, the castle transitioning from night defense to day activity. Life continues. Another day begins, and tonight you'll do this all over again, the warming pan ritual, the layers of clothing and blankets, the dogs and servants, the prayers and herbs and desperate measures. You'll survive that night too, probably. Most nights end in mornings. The light through the window is still pale and thin, the sun not yet high enough to provide any actual warmth. It'll be hours before the chamber feels even marginally less hostile. But the darkness is gone, and that's something. Night is when the cold is most dangerous, most personal, most potentially deadly. Day lets you move around, generate heat through activity, distract yourself with duties. Margaret opens the chamber door, letting in a servant with breakfast. Something warm, probably ale and bread, maybe porridge if the kitchen fires have been going long enough. You'll eat near the fire, wrapping your hands around a warm cup, letting the heat seep into your fingers that are still slightly numb from night. Alice is pulling your heavy blankets back, airing the bed while it's empty, shaking out the dog hair and letting moisture escape from the linens. Tonight she'll rebuild this fortress, preparing it for another cold battle. But right now it's just a construction project, a practical matter of household management. Bella and Pip have claimed spots near the fire, sprawling in the warmth, their work done for now. They served their purpose overnight, provided heat, provided comfort, provided living warmth in a cold stone world. Tonight they'll do it again. This is their job. They're good at it. You survived another medieval winter night. You did it with textiles and fire and servants and dogs and prayers and sheer stubborn endurance. You did it the way queens have done it for generations, the way queens will continue to do it, until someone finally invents better architecture or the medieval period ends, whichever comes first. The cold didn't win. You're still here, still breathing, still preparing to face a day that will be followed by another night, that will require all the same preparations and strategies and desperate measures. This is winter. This is survival. This is how queens sleep without freezing to death. And now you know in detail, in texture, in sensory truth, what that actually meant. Not the romantic medieval fantasy, but the cold, uncomfortable, occasionally terrifying reality of trying to stay alive through darkness in a world that hadn't yet figured out central heating. Morning is here. The night is over. You made it. And tonight you'll do it all again. Let's go back to something we touched on earlier, but deserves its own deep examination, the psychological weight of repetition. Because it's not just one cold night you're surviving. It's 100 cold nights in a row, and the cumulative effect of that nightly ordeal is something chroniclers rarely captured, but that shaped medieval consciousness in profound ways. Imagine knowing every single day as the sun sets that you're about to face the same trial again. The warming pan ritual, the layers of wool, the closed curtains, the darkness, the cold that finds you despite everything, the interrupted sleep, the frozen garderobe. And you'll do this tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after that for months. Possibly 4 months, possibly 6 if it's a bad year. This creates a specific kind of psychological exhaustion that modern people rarely experience. We have bad nights, insomnia, illness, anxiety, but they're usually isolated incidents or short-term problems. Medieval winter was relentless. It was a siege that lasted half the year, and you were both the fortress and the defender, and the enemy never got tired, never negotiated, never gave you a night off. Some queens developed what we might now recognise as seasonal depression. There are letters from winter months that have a particular tone, flat resigned, occasionally desperate. "I cannot remember warmth," one queen wrote in February of 1389. "It has been winter so long that I fear spring is a story we told ourselves a collective delusion." This wasn't poetic exaggeration. This was someone whose psychological reserves were depleted after months of nightly cold battles. The anticipation was its own burden. Around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, as daylight began to fade, you'd start thinking about bedtime, still hours away but already present in your mind. The dread would build slowly, knowing what was coming, knowing you couldn't avoid it, knowing that tonight would be essentially identical to last night. The repetition removed any element of novelty or challenge. It was just grinding, predictable discomfort. Medieval medical texts occasionally mentioned something they called winter melancholy, a condition where people became listless, tearful, unable to find joy in activities they normally enjoyed. Modern doctors would recognise this as seasonal affective disorder caused by reduced sunlight exposure and vitamin D deficiency. But the medieval understanding attributed it to an excess of cold, phlegmatic humours, and they treated it with warming foods and spices and prayers. Children born in autumn learned to dread bedtime before they could even speak. They associated sleep with cold, with discomfort, with their mother's anxious face, as she layered blankets over them. Some children developed sleep resistance, crying, fighting bedtime, clinging to the fire, not because they weren't tired, but because they'd learned that sleep meant cold. Parents had to navigate this, balancing the child's psychological distress against the reality that everyone had to sleep eventually. The servants bore this burden differently. Margaret, sleeping on her pallet near the fire, was warmer than Alice at the foot of your bed, but both of them endured this every night with fewer resources and no choice in the matter. Some servants developed what we'd now call trauma responses, anxiety around bedtime hypervigilance, about fire maintenance, obsessive behaviours around blanket arrangement. There are records of servants who broke down completely. One account from 1342 describes a chambermaid who simply refused to go to bed one night in January. She sat by the kitchen fire crying, saying she couldn't do it anymore, she couldn't face another cold night. The household didn't know how to respond. They eventually let her sleep in the kitchen near the ovens, and she stayed there for the rest of winter. The psychological toll showed up in other ways. Increased irritability throughout the household during winter months. More arguments, more conflicts, more disciplinary problems with servants. People's tolerance for minor annoyances decreased when they were chronically cold and sleep-deprived. A household that functioned smoothly in summer could become dysfunctional by February. Some people developed superstitious counting behaviours, counting the nights until the winter solstice, then counting the nights after it, until some arbitrary point when they decided spring was approaching. These countdowns provided psychological structure, a sense of progress toward an endpoint. But they could also backfire if spring came late, if the counting reached its destination but the cold continued. Dreams changed in winter. There are scattered references in personal letters to dreams of warmth, sitting in sunlight, swimming in summer rivers, standing near bakers' ovens. These dreams were described with a particular intensity, like oases in a desert. Waking from a warm dream to cold reality was its own special cruelty. The relief when spring finally came wasn't just physical, it was profound psychological release. The first night you could sleep without all the layers, without the warming pan ritual, without the dread. People described this in letters as almost spiritual. "Last night I slept in simple linen and woke warm," one chronicle entry notes. "I had forgotten this was possible." But spring was temporary. Everyone knew that. Even in June, when you were warm and comfortable, there was the knowledge that it would come again. Next October, the cold would return and you'd face the same nightly battles, the same exhaustion, the same psychological grinding. This created a particular medieval mindset, cyclical thinking. Acceptance of inevitable suffering, focus on survival rather than happiness. Your goal wasn't to eliminate the problem, but to develop the mental fortitude to face it again and again, and to night whatever. Number thises of this winter, you'll deploy all that expertise again. You'll go through the rituals you've performed dozens or hundreds of times. You'll lie in the dark knowing exactly how the next 8 hours will unfold because you've lived them before. But you'll survive. You know you'll survive because you've survived every previous night. The track record is perfect so far. That's not comforting exactly, but it's something. It's evidence that this is survivable even when it doesn't feel like it. There's one group we haven't talked about enough, the travellers, the people caught between places when winter strikes. Because at least you have a chamber cold as it is. At least you have walls and a bed and servants. But what about the merchants, the pilgrims, the messengers, the nobles travelling between estates, who get caught on the road when night falls? Medieval inns exist, but they're not what you're imagining. Forget any cosy fantasy of a cheerful tavern with individual rooms and soft beds. A typical roadside inn is one large common room with a fireplace, maybe some rough sleeping platforms along the walls, and an understanding that whoever pays gets whatever space is available. Privacy is not on the menu. Warmth is theoretical. You arrive at an inn after a day of cold travel riding or walking through winter landscape, wind cutting through your cloak, fingers numb inside gloves, your whole body chilled to the core. The inn seems like salvation from outside smoke rising from its chimney light, glowing through gaps in the shutters, the promise of shelter. You push open the door, and it's barely warmer than outside. Yes, there's a fire, but the room is large, the ceiling is low, but not that low, and there are gaps everywhere around the door, the window shutters between roof planks. The fire struggles to heat this space, just like it struggles in your castle chamber. Maybe the temperature inside is 45 degrees while outside is 35. That's the upgrade you're paying for. The room is crowded. Other travellers got here first and they've claimed the best spots closest to the fire on the few available sleeping platforms near any heat sources. You're a queen, so theoretically you get priority, but you're travelling somewhat anonymously, or with a small retinue, and the social hierarchy gets muddy in inn common rooms. Everyone wants warmth, everyone paid, everyone suffers together. There might be straw on the floor. Might be. If the innkeeper is conscientious and straw is available, you'll sleep on this straw wrapped in your travelling cloak using your saddlebag as a pillow. If you're lucky, you brought a blanket. If you're really lucky, your servants managed to secure a spot on one of the sleeping platforms, which at least gets you off the floor where cold air pools. The smell is remarkable. Wet wool, everyone's clothing is damp from travel. Unwashed bodies bathing in winter is rare, even among nobility, and travellers have been on the road for days. Smoke from the fire that isn't venting properly. Food smells from whatever the innkeeper's cooking. Animal smells because there might be livestock in an adjacent room or even in this room. Urine smells because the chamber pot situation is primitive at best. You're sleeping in a room with strangers, merchants, other noble servants, possibly some people of questionable character who make you nervous. Everyone can hear everyone else snoring, coughing, farting, the rustling of bodies trying to find comfortable positions on uncomfortable surfaces. There's no darkness either, not complete darkness, because the fire stays burning all night and people are moving around, adding fuel, getting up to relieve themselves. Security is a genuine concern. You can't leave valuables unattended. You sleep with your money pouch under your head, your important items close to your body. There are stories probably true of travellers who fell asleep in inns and woke to find their belongings stolen, their cloaks gone, even their shoes taken. The innkeeper may or may not intervene. That's not really his job. Some inns have separate smaller rooms for high-status travellers, but these are rare and expensive, and they're not necessarily warmer than the common room. You trade privacy for distance from the fire, which might not be a good trade. At least in the common room you can edge closer to the flames if you're desperate. The sleeping arrangements are chaotic. People pack in wherever there's space and personal boundaries compress. You might have a stranger's feet near your face. Someone might roll over in their sleep and bump into you. The person next to you might be sick, coughing, feverish, and you can't move away because there's nowhere to move. Disease spreads efficiently in winter inns. Historians still argue whether medieval travellers genuinely accepted these conditions or whether they were just resigned to them. The letters we have suggest resignation mixed with complaint. Spent the night at an inn 3 miles from Bristol, one travelling merchant wrote in 1401. Would have been warmer sleeping in the stable with the horses, but less dignified. Dignity is expensive in winter. Some travellers tried to time their journeys to reach proper estates or monasteries instead of commercial inns. Monasteries offered hospitality as religious duty, and their accommodations were sometimes better: actual beds, multiple fires, organised sleeping arrangements. But monasteries couldn't accommodate everyone, and they weren't located conveniently for all routes. The worst nights were when inns were full and you had to sleep in barns or outbuildings. Just you, your servants if you had them, whatever animals were already resident, and the cold. Hay provides some insulation if you burrow into it, but it's also prickly and dusty and home to mice and insects. Sleeping in barns was considered acceptable for low-status travellers, embarrassing for nobles, and dangerous for everyone because barns weren't secure and they were cold. Some travellers simply died on the road in winter, caught between towns when snow came, or unable to find shelter, or finding shelter but not surviving the night. The chronicles mention these deaths casually. 3 merchants froze between York and Durham, because winter travel deaths were common enough not to be remarkable. Bodies were sometimes not found until spring thaw. The smart travellers didn't travel in deep winter unless absolutely necessary. But necessity doesn't always accommodate seasons. Messages had to be delivered, business had to be conducted, family emergencies required travel. So people bundled up and hoped for the best and accepted that winter travel meant sleeping in conditions worse than anything they'd endure at home. Your castle chamber, for all its coldness, is paradise compared to a winter inn. You have your own bed, your own servants, your dogs, your elaborate heating strategies. Inn travellers get a patch of floor proximity to strangers and hope that the fire doesn't go out before morning. When you lie in your bed tonight behind your curtains, uncomfortable but safe, remember, the travellers sleeping in roadside inns or barns or ditches. Remember that your cold is relative, that worse cold exists, that some people are fighting even harder battles against winter than you are, and be grateful you're not one of them. Now let's talk about the morning after, not just one morning, but the accumulated physical toll that months of cold nights leave on your body. Because surviving winter isn't just about making it through individual nights, it's about what those nights do to you over time, the ways cold reshapes bodies, and health, in ways medieval medicine barely understood. Your hands tell the story first. By February, your fingers have developed what we'd now call chilblains, painful swelling and inflammation caused by repeated exposure to cold followed by rewarming. The skin on your fingertips is red, sometimes purple, itchy, and burning simultaneously. Medieval physicians called this winter fingers and recommended rubbing them with warm oil or holding them near fire, which sometimes helped and sometimes made it worse. The chilblains appear despite your gloves, despite keeping your hands under blankets at night, despite every precaution. Cold is persistent and finds ways through your defences. Some mornings your fingers are so stiff and painful that you can't hold a cup properly, can't manipulate small objects, can't do delicate work. Your ladies-in-waiting have to help you with tasks you'd normally manage yourself. Your feet are worse. The wool stockings and the warming stones and Bella's body heat, none of it fully protects your feet from cumulative cold exposure. Your toes ache constantly by midwinter. The nails sometimes turn dark from minor frostbite damage that never quite becomes serious enough to lose the digit, but never fully heals either. Walking is uncomfortable. Standing for long periods is painful. There are queens who lost toes to winter. Not many, and not openly discussed, but the medical records hint at it. Treatment for cold-damaged extremities appears in household expense accounts. Payments to physicians for remedies for frozen flesh. These delicate phrases mask the reality winter sometimes won. The battle took pieces of people, left them permanently marked. Your skin dries out terribly. The constant cold and wind and proximity to fire smoke strips moisture from your face and hands. Medieval skincare consisted of animal fat-based ointments, rendered lard or tallow, sometimes scented with herbs if you were wealthy. You'd rub this greasy substance into your cracked skin before bed, and it helped somewhat, but your face still felt tight and painful by March, years of winter wear visible in fine lines around your eyes and mouth. Respiratory problems accumulated too, months of breathing cold air, sleeping in smoky rooms, exposure to other people's illnesses in close quarters. Your lungs bore the burden. A cough that started in December might persist through February, becoming so familiar that you barely noticed it. Everyone coughed in winter. The sound of collective coughing in the Great Hall was like a chorus, a seasonal music of respiratory distress. Some of these coughs turned serious. Pneumonia killed regularly, though medieval medicine didn't call it that. They talked about winter fever, or lung congestion, or cold humours settling in the chest. The treatment was keeping warm and drinking medicinal teas, which sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Queens died of respiratory infections that started as simple winter coughs. Being wealthy didn't make your lungs immune. Your joints ached. The cold and the dampness, because stone chambers were always somewhat damp condensation, forming constantly created the perfect conditions for what we'd now call arthritis symptoms. Your knees hurt climbing stairs. Your hips protested when you stood from sitting. Your shoulders were stiff every morning, requiring gradual movement and warming before they functioned properly. Medieval medicine attributed this to cold entering the joints and recommended warming poultices and hot compresses, which provided temporary relief but didn't address the underlying problem that you were living in conditions that inflamed your joints nightly. Some older queens became genuinely mobility impaired by late winter, their bodies worn down by months of cold stress. Sleep deprivation had its own effects. Months of interrupted, poor-quality sleep left you foggy, forgetful, emotionally fragile. You'd snap at servants over minor issues, cry unexpectedly, struggle to focus on complex tasks. Medieval observers attributed this to winter melancholy, or humoral imbalance, but modern science would recognize it as the cognitive effects of chronic sleep deprivation, combined with seasonal affective disorder. Your immune system was compromised. Fighting cold all night, every night, for months required enormous energy from your body. That energy couldn't also fight off every infection and illness, so you got sick more in winter, minor illnesses mostly, but they accumulated. A stomach ailment here, a headache there, a rash, a fever that lasted 2 days. Your body was constantly battling on multiple fronts. Weight loss was common by late winter. The effort of staying warm burned calories, and appetite often decreased in cold conditions. You might eat less without consciously realizing it, and by March you'd notice your clothing fitting differently, your face looking thinner. This wasn't considered unhealthy. Medieval people didn't have modern nutritional understanding, but it was another way winter took its toll. Some physical effects were more subtle. Your hair became brittle and broke more easily after months of being hidden under caps never washed properly, because washing hair in winter was miserable and dangerous. Your teeth sometimes ached from cold enamel contracting and expanding with temperature changes, exposing sensitive areas. Your eyes were dry and irritated from smoke and cold wind. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced these cumulative effects as acutely as we would, or whether they just accepted them as normal seasonal changes. The sources suggest they definitely noticed there are enough references to winter ailments and relief when spring brought recovery, but they had no framework for understanding cold exposure as cumulative physical stress. Spring brought healing, but slowly. The first warm days didn't immediately fix months of damage. Your chilblains took weeks to fully resolve. Your respiratory issues gradually improved as you spent less time in smoky rooms. Your sleep quality recovered as nights became warmer. But some effects were permanent. Joints that started aching in one winter might never fully stop. Scars from frostbite remained. Respiratory damage accumulated over years. There's a reason medieval life expectancy was low, and winter was part of that equation. Not because any single winter killed you, but because 30 or 40 winters of accumulated damage wore bodies down. Each winter took a little piece of you, a bit of lung capacity, some joint flexibility, a toe, maybe definitely some peace of mind. And eventually there wasn't enough left to survive the next one. You're lying in bed now, your fingers slightly numb, your toes aching, your joints stiff, your throat a little raw from smoke. This is normal. This is February. This is what winter does to bodies. In 2 months, maybe 3, you'll feel better. Your skin will heal, your cough will fade, your joints will hurt less. But next winter will come, and you'll do this again, and your body will remember. Now let the day's warmth, such as it is, begin to ease your journey back from that cold chamber. The servants are moving, the fire is building, and the castle is waking to routine. You've walked beside a medieval queen through her longest, coldest hours. You felt the weight of those blankets, heard the breath of servants and dogs, watched frost form on stone walls where it had no business being. These weren't just historical facts we examined tonight. They were experiences, textures, moments of human vulnerability that spanned centuries but feel immediate when you let them. The cold was real. The fear was real. The small victories of survival were real. And now from that medieval chamber you can return to your own bed with its central heating, its modern insulation, its absence of guardrobe frost and warming pan rituals. You can appreciate warmth in a way perhaps you couldn't before. You can understand that comfort is not a universal human constant, but a hard-won modern privilege. Sleep now in your warm room under your light blankets, knowing that you've touched something ancient and difficult and profoundly human, the simple, desperate nightly battle to survive until morning. The queens who fought that battle would understand your gratitude for warmth. They'd appreciate that you remembered them, that you honoured their struggle by truly imagining it. Rest well. Dream of spring if you like, or perhaps dream of nothing at all. The way those medieval sleepers would have wished for unconsciousness without cold, without fear, without the weight of survival pressing down through layers of wool. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Good night. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Good night.